Chapter 1991. Vice Palace Master? Qin Feiyang frowned. Although he had never seen this person before, as the second in command of Nine Heavens Palace, he must be very strong. Gong Zifeng shook his head. Our Vice Palace Master is a little mysterious. Mysterious? Qin Feiyang was taken aback and asked suspiciously. What do you mean? It means that he's elusive. The entire Nine Heavens Palace. That's not right. It should be said that in the entire northern region, only a handful of people have seen the Vice Palace Master. Gong Zifeng said. So mysterious? Qin Feiyang was surprised and asked, You haven't seen him before? Not just me, other than the disciples on the heaven list, no one else has seen him before. Even the disciples on the earth list don't know what he looks like. Actually, it makes sense. Such a big figure. How can we easily see him? Gong Zifeng shook his head. What about the Palace Master of Nine Heavens Palace? Qin Feiyang asked. Palace Master? Someone stronger than the Vice Palace Master must be even more mysterious. I've heard of the Vice Palace Master. But this Lord Palace Master, I've never heard anyone mention him since I entered Nine Heavens Palace. I'm wondering if there's such a person. Gong Zifeng smiled bitterly. Sure enough, each one is more mysterious than the other. Qin Feiyang muttered and asked, Who's the one in charge? Usually it's the Palace Masters. Gong Zifeng said. Qin Feiyang frowned. Including your grandfather? Gong Zifeng nodded. Qin Feiyang said in realization. So the Palace Masters are the ones in charge. No wonder your grandfather dared to be so arrogant. Not all of them. The one in charge is actually the Grand Elder. Our Nine Heavens Palace has a total of 10 Grand Elders. They are the strongest existences in our Nine Heavens Palace apart from the Palace Master and Vice Palace Master. But the other 9 Grand Elders are immersed in cultivation and never care about worldly affairs. The 2 Palace Masters have never shown themselves either. So the person who truly controls the Nine Heavens Palace is actually the First Elder. Although the various Palace Masters possess real power, they do not dare to act rashly before the First Elder. Gong Zifeng said. Great Elder. Qin Feiyang's eyes flickered. After pondering for a moment he said, There's something I need you to investigate. What is it? Gong Zifeng was suspicious. Qin Feiyang said, The matter of me slandering the Nine Heavens Palace, I'm sure you already know about it. Yes. There's no need to doubt this. Grandfather and father must be behind this. Gong Zifeng said. I know it's them, but I have no proof. Qin Feiyang said. You want evidence? Gong Zifeng asked. Yes. It would be best if we could find those who were ordered to spread the rumors. Because only by catching them can we have solid evidence. Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice. Although Feng Yuan and Feng Wenhai were the masterminds behind the scenes, their positions in Nine Heavens Palace were too high. If they directly started with them, they might fall into their trap. Therefore, they had to start with the people below them. Hearing this, Gong Zifeng frowned. He lowered his head and fell into deep thought. After a while, he raised his head and looked at Qin Feiyang. He said, I understand what you mean. However, the people who spread the rumors are most definitely the trusted aides of my grandfather and the others. As for those trusted aides, I know absolutely nothing about them. I fear that it will be a bit difficult to investigate them. Qin Feiyang said, No matter how difficult it is, we have to find them. All right. I'll try my best. Gong Zifeng nodded. I believe in my eyesight. I won't misjudge them. Qin Feiyang smiled. Ha! Gong Zifeng laughed and said, All right, I'll go arrange it now. You have to be careful on your side, especially Chengli. He's a treacherous person who doesn't know what he looks like. Is that so? Qin Feiyang was surprised. When father first brought me to Nine Heavens Palace, I stayed in the outer sect for a while, so I know his character very well. Gong Zifeng said. Got it. Qin Feiyang nodded. Gong Zifeng's virtual image disappeared immediately. Qin Feiyang put away the image crystal and looked at Qin Ruishuang and Fire Lotus with a smile. It seems that we've been fooled by Cheng Li's appearance. Humph. He better not get in the way. Qin Ruishuang said coldly. Cheng Li is nothing to worry about. Even if he really wants to deal with us, we don't have to pay attention to him. The most important thing now is to find a way to sneak into the Vice Palace Master's study. Qin Feiyang smiled. Fire Lotus asked, Qin Dage, why don't you let Gongzi Feng go? Girl, that's the Vice Palace Master's study. Even his grandfather Feng Yuan may not be able to get in, let alone a mere Gongzi Feng. It's already very good of him to tell us where the historical records are hidden. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Fire Lotus said worriedly, but the Vice Palace Master's study must be a dragon's den. Qin Feiyang clenched his hands and said with a sharp look in his eyes, even if it's a dragon's den or a tiger's den, we have to go. Rumble. The battle outside was getting more and more intense. The entire sword peak began to tremble slowly. Damn it, are you done? All of a sudden, an impatient cold voice sounded from the cave abode at the top of the sword peak. There was a trace of hostility in the voice. The more than 200 people outside immediately looked up and found that the voice came from cave abode number 1. There was someone in cave abode number 1? Wait. Elder Chung seemed to have said that there was originally a person on this sword peak. Now that you mention it, it seems that Elder Chung really did say that. Cave abode number 1 has already been occupied. Then why are we still fighting? Everyone frowned. What are you afraid of? Being alone on this sword peak, he must be bullied and has nowhere to go. Cave abode number 1, we must take it. The black-clothed young man who first challenged Qin Feiyang said. Really? The voice sounded again from cave abode number 1, full of disdain. Yes, the black-clothed young man shouted. Qin Feiyang naturally heard the voice, waved his hand and said, let's go out and have a look. The three of them walked out of the cave abode. Hua Yi Gao Shall We, and the other 5 young men just came out of their respective cave abodes. Obviously, they all heard the voice. Brother Jiang. Gao Shaohui secretly greeted Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang nodded with a smile and looked up at the black-clothed young man. The black-clothed young man looked at cave abode number 1 with a provocative face. The rest of the people, standing behind the black-clothed young man, also looked at cave abode number 1 covetously, showing signs of following the black-clothed young man's lead. Qin Feiyang looked at cave abode number 1 again. The stone door was tightly closed. There was no more sound coming from inside. There was dead silence at the scene. What kind of person could it be? Huai walked to Qin Feiyang's side, his eyes full of curiosity. Boom! Suddenly, the stone door of cave abode number 1 slowly opened. Ta-da! The sound of footsteps sounded one after another. The footsteps were very light. However, there was a sense of oppression. Do you want to intimidate us with just a little momentum? Aren't you too naive? The black-clothed young man raised his eyebrows and sneered. But inside cave abode number 1, there was no response except for the sound of footsteps, and no one in the cave abode appeared for a long time. Gradually, the footsteps became heavier and heavier. The sense of oppression became more and more obvious. Even everyone's heartbeat could not help but beat with the frequency of the footsteps. Qin Rishwang's pupils shrank, whispering, he's not a simple character. Fire Lotus nodded. It seemed that this person was the first type of person Qin Dage mentioned, a solitary expert. His momentum is quite scary, but he hasn't shown up. I think he's bluffing. You don't want to come out. Well, I'll personally invite you out and see if you're a dragon or a worm. The black-clothed young man took a step forward and rushed toward cave abode number 1. Fire Lotus frowned. Is this person crazy? How can he provoke others like this? Qin Feiyang sized up the black-clothed young man and smiled. Can't you see? He obviously wants to dominate this sword peak, so he must perform well. Perform? I think this time he's going to paint a tiger but end up looking like a dog. Qin Rishwang sneered. Let's wait and see. Qin Feiyang snickered secretly. At this moment, the black-clothed young man had already landed outside cave abode number 1 and was about to enter. Dong! The footsteps suddenly became extremely loud, as if a giant beast was walking. The ground was shaking. At the same time, the invisible sense of oppression also soared in an instant. The black-clothed young man outside the cave abode suddenly stiffened, and his raised foot could not step into the cave abode. What's going on? The crowd below was in an uproar. This, Qin Feiyang was shocked. Just a sense of oppression was able to block the black-clothed young man outside? One must know. The black-clothed young man's cultivation was not simple. He was a perfect realm war god. Boom. The black-clothed young man was of course unwilling to give up. He immediately released his divine power to fight against the invisible pressure. Dong. The footsteps became more and more deafening. The invisible sense of oppression was still increasing, like a tide, colliding with the black-clothed young man's divine power. You dare to be arrogant with this little ability? About 10 breaths later, the voice finally sounded, containing a shocking amount of hostility. Following closely, the sound of his footsteps was like thunder, deafening. Everything within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was trembling. The invisible sense of oppression instantly shattered the black-clothed young man's divine power and drowned him. Plop. The black-clothed young man's legs turned to jelly and he fell to the ground. Large beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He was shocked. This time he had really kicked an iron plate. How could this be? The people below looked at the black-clothed young man, and their hearts were in a perilous situation. Previously, they had fought with the black-clothed young man in order to fight for first place, so they knew how powerful he was. But now he was kneeling down. The most unbelievable thing was that it was only the sound of footsteps. Boom. Suddenly, the invisible sense of oppression descended from the sky and drowned everyone here, including Qin Feiyang and the others. Plop. One by one they knelt down. Gao Xiaowei and the other 5 young men were not spared either. Everyone's face was filled with fear. What kind of terrifying existence was this? Chapter 1992. However, in the midst of their shock, someone noticed the situation of Qin Feiyang and the others and immediately exclaimed, "How is this possible?" Hearing the exclamation, everyone looked over. Their eyes widened in anger and disbelief. The 4 of them stood on the spot as if nothing had happened. Their bodies did not even tremble. How did they do it? One should know. Even a perfect war god would not be able to withstand this pressure. However, a beginner war god, 2 beginner war gods, and 1 advanced war god could stand there steadily. What was going on? Everyone's heart was filled with incredulity. But at the same time, Qin Feiyang's expression was also filled with astonishment. However, this astonishment did not come from the mysterious expert in cave abode number 1. It came from Hua Yi and Fire Lotus. He had opened the door of potential. This little bit of pressure naturally had no effect on him. As for Qin Rushuang, before she entered the ancient castle to comprehend the ultimacy of becoming a god, she had also opened all the doors of potential with the help of Yu Huang, Willow Tree, and the others. At that time, Gong Sunbei was also there. After all, Gong Sunbei had always been the person Qin Feiyang wanted the most. Therefore he was not stingy with this person. However, Hua Yi and Fire Lotus could also ignore this pressure. This was somewhat strange. Could it be that the 2 of them had also opened the door of potential? But that was not right. When Fire Lotus had just condensed her body, she was not wearing anything. Qin Feiyang had seen her from head to toe. Of course, he did not see the potential mark on Fire Lotus's chest. This proved that Fire Lotus did not open the door of potential. If she did not open the door of potential, then why could she ignore this pressure? The more Qin Feiyang thought about it, the more puzzled he became. He could not help but ask, "Girl, don't you feel the pressure?" "Yes. But for some reason, this pressure does not seem to have any effect on me." Fire Lotus thought to herself. She was also puzzled. "It doesn't work." The corner of Qin Feiyang's mouth twitched. Why was that? Hua Yi could also use other reasons to explain himself. For example, he was hiding his cultivation, or he had some strange treasure on him. However, he was very clear about the Fire Lotus's situation. His cultivation was only at the initial stage of the War God stage, and he didn't have any rare treasures on him. Wait a minute. Could it be related to her undead body? Now Qin Feiyang could only make such a guess. This was because the only difference between the Fire Lotus and the others was that she was an undead. Inside the number 1 cave residence, there was also a surprised voice. Obviously, this mysterious expert also noticed the situation of Qin Feiyang and the other 3. Dong. Following closely, the footsteps became louder and louder. The pressure also became more and more terrifying. Not only were the sword peaks and the ground shaking, but the other sword peaks were also shaking violently. It was obvious. This mysterious expert wanted to compete with Qin Feiyang and the other three. However, Qin Feiyang and the other three remained indifferent and as steady as Mount Tai. On the contrary, the disciples of the other sword peaks roared with dissatisfaction. Damn lunatic, what are you doing? Can't you just stop and let us have a few days of peace? Fortunately, it's you. If it were someone else, they would have been kicked out of the Ninth Heaven Palace long ago. Angry shouts came one after another. Qin Feiyang and the other three looked at each other. What was the background of the person in the number 1 cave residence? How could he be called a lunatic? And listening to these words, it was not difficult to judge that this person must be a lawless person who often caused trouble. This revealed an important piece of information. This person must have a certain identity. Otherwise, the Ninth Heaven Palace would not allow him to cause trouble like this. And at the number 1 sword peak, Cheng-Li stood at the edge of the cliff and looked at Qin Feiyang's direction. The corners of his mouth curved into a meaningful smile. A lunatic. An arrogant person. When these two people met, there would definitely be friction. Jiang Haotian, don't blame me. This is all Feng Wenhai's arrangement. If you die in the hands of a lunatic, blame Feng Wenhai. Murmuring, Cheng-Li turned around and strode away. There was an ancient hall in front of him. Above the door, there were a few bold words engraved. Outer Deacon Hall. Interesting. Seeing that Qin Feiyang and the other three had not knelt down, a mocking voice once again sounded from the number 1 cave residence. I don't think it's that interesting. It's purely a senseless act. Qin Feiyang looked at the number 1 cave residence and said indifferently. A senseless act? Haha. Kid, you're crazy. If that's the case, then I'll show you a less senseless act. The voice fell. The sound of footsteps dissipated and was replaced by a terrifying murderous aura, roaring out from the number 1 cave residence. Murderous aura? Qin Feiyang was taken aback, and then the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Competing with him in murderous aura? Wasn't this looking for a beating? Boom. At that moment, Qin Feiyang's body shook, and a monstrous murderous aura rushed out from his body. Accompanied by a loud bang, the two murderous auras collided. There was no suspense. Qin Feiyang obtained victory by crushing his opponent as easily as crushing rotten wood. He didn't dare to say anything else. But in terms of murderous aura, if he said that he was second, no one would dare to say that he was first. This was confidence. The people in the number 1 cave residence were incomparably surprised. What kind of person had come this time? The murderous aura that erupted was actually more terrifying than his? No. The word terrifying could no longer be used to describe it. This level of murderous aura was even dozens or hundreds of times more than his. This is the act you want to perform? It's still so boring. Qin Feiyang said with a faint smile, his words full of provocation. Inside the number 1 cave residence, there was dead silence. Boom. All of a sudden, an expanse of blood-red light gushed out and pounced towards Qin Feiyang like a tide. The bloody light not only had a monstrous murderous aura, but also carried a terrifying divine power. Fire Lotus's eyes trembled, secretly saying, Qin Dage, be careful, this is a divine art. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and smiled. Looking at the number 1 cave residence, he said indifferently, I'll return it to you. Boom. As soon as his words fell, he raised his head and slapped his palm. Golden light burst out from his palm, and the bloody light suddenly turned in the air and rushed into the cave residence. In the cave residence, there was a muffled groan immediately. Obviously, the people in the cave residence were seriously injured. It's getting more and more interesting. However, not only was this person not angry, his mood was even higher. Divine power was like a waterfall rolling out. Brother Jiang, this person should be a battle maniac. If this continues, I guess there will be no end to it. Hui frowned. Battle maniac, Qin Feiyang murmured, his eyes flashing, and said with a smile, this kind of person to others may be a lunatic, but I like it very much. You still like it? Hui was speechless. The so-called battle maniac was someone who wanted to fight with anyone he saw, and he would never give up until the outcome was decided. Being together with this kind of person would cause trouble at any time and place. Who would like such a person? But this guy in front of him seemed to have met a confidant. Sure enough, each and every one of them was a weirdo. Actually, my brother also has the potential to be a battle maniac. Fire Lotus covered her mouth and laughed. Makes sense. Hui nodded. Qin Feiyang was stunned, helplessly looked at Fire Lotus and said, "Girl, I don't have the potential in this area. Others say that only people who are like-minded will absorb each other. Since you're not a battle maniac, then why do you still like him?" Hui was very puzzled. Qin Feiyang pondered for a while and sighed. "In a word, I'm tired of scheming against each other." "What the hell?" Hui frowned. What did this have to do with scheming against each other? Battle maniacs, when encountering problems, basically rely on their fists to solve them. This kind of person, although sometimes difficult to deal with, is usually more straightforward and not scheming. So when interacting with this kind of person, you don't have to be on guard at all times. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. "I see." Fire Lotus nodded in realization and laughed. "Now that you've said it, it does make sense. That's what I said. In your eyes, everything he says makes sense." Qin Rushwang teased. "Sister Rushwang." Fire Lotus pouted coquettishly and could not help but blush. However, under the cover of the mask no one saw it. Qin Feiyang raised his head and looked at cave abode number 1, asking with a smile, "Sir, is there anything else interesting to watch?" There was a moment of silence in the cave abode before a voice sounded. "Kid, you're not the ordinary kind of crazy." "Thank you for the compliment." Qin Feiyang smiled. "Tell me your name." Lunatic said. "Jiang Haotian." Qin Feiyang said. "Jiang Haotian. I also like people like you, but it's far from enough for me to approve of you." Lunatic said. "Do I need your approval?" Qin Feiyang asked in return. "Haha. Interesting, this is too interesting." Lunatic laughed endlessly, accompanied by the sound of something tearing through the air. A piece of paper flew out of the cave abode. Qin Feiyang grabbed it and lowered his head to take a look. A smile flashed across his face before he tore the paper into pieces and said with a smile, "Then I'll see you there." "Haha, I'll see you there." Madman laughed and then went silent. Hui asked suspiciously, "Brother Jiang, what do you mean?" "That's right, brother. You didn't even show us what was written on the paper before you tore it into pieces." Fire Lotus was also a little displeased. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and said, "Let's go to Sword Peak number 1 to get our identity badge." After saying that, he turned around and took a step forward, stepping into the void and leaving. Qin Rushwang and the other two looked at each other with suspicion in their eyes. What were the two of them playing at? After Qin Feiyang and the other three left, the pressure also dissipated. The black-clothed youth and the others stood up and glanced at cave abode number 1 before looking at Qin Feiyang's back view with reverence in their eyes. This was a true expert. Unfortunately, this person was not willing to be with them. Otherwise, he would definitely be the king of this Sword Peak. "I don't care what you want to do, as long as you don't disturb my cultivation. Otherwise, even if the heavens come down, they won't be able to save you." Lunatic's voice was heard with a terrifying murderous aura. "Understood, understood." The black-clothed youth and the others shuddered and hurriedly nodded respectfully. However, why did those words sound so familiar? Wait a minute. It was Jiang Haotian. Not long ago, Jiang Haotian also said the same thing. "I don't care what you want to do, as long as you don't disturb me." It seemed like the two of them had similar personalities. Chapter 1993. The lunatic had stopped. The disciples of the other Sword Peaks also returned to their cave residences one after another. However, there were also many disciples who gathered together and discussed with righteous indignation. "Senior brother, may I know how to get to the number 1 Sword Peak?" Above one of the Sword Peaks, Qin Feiyang stopped and looked at the few young men and women who were at peak perfection and asked with a smile, "Go straight. The highest Sword Peak in the middle is the number 1 Sword Peak." A young man said without looking up. "Thank you, senior brother." Qin Feiyang cupped his hands and smiled, then left with Huolian and the other two. Wait. But the young man suddenly froze and hurriedly turned to look at Qin Feiyang and the other three. Qin Feiyang stopped and looked at the young man. Senior brother, what's the matter? He had an extremely humble look on his face. The young man said, You don't even know the number 1 sword peak. Are you new disciples? Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. The young man said, So that lunatic just now was mad at you. It can't be considered flipping out. It's just that some people, competing for the first place, provoked that person. Qin Feiyang smiled. Competing for the first place? The young men and women shook their heads when they heard this. With that lunatic here, do you think it's your turn to compete for the first place? You're really unlucky to be assigned to that lunatic's sword peak. Since we're from the same sect, we'll give you a piece of advice. Don't provoke that lunatic. Otherwise, you'll never have a peaceful day in the 9th Heaven Palace. They looked at Qin Feiyang and the other 4. Although they were giving advice out of goodwill, there was a hint of gloating in their eyes. Thank you, senior brothers and sisters. We'll remember it. Qin Feiyang cupped his hands and thanked him. Then he turned around and left. Fire Lotus followed Qin Feiyang and thought, Brother, why does it sound more and more wrong? I also feel like I've been tricked. Qin Rishwang said. This matter is actually very clear. We were purposely arranged by Chengli to go to that sword peak. Hui sighed. Deliberately arranged? Qin Feiyang was taken aback. He turned to Hui and asked suspiciously, Brother Hua, what do you mean? You wish. The outer sect has a total of 10,000 sword peaks, which can accommodate 10 million disciples. And now, there are only a little over 8 million outer sect disciples. In other words, currently, there are still over 100 empty sword peaks in the outer sect. But this Chengli, why didn't he arrange for us to go to other sword peaks? Why did he want us to go to that madman's sword peak? Hui said. Maybe they don't want to waste resources. After all, it's a waste of resources for one person to occupy an entire sword peak. Qin Feiyang guessed. Brother Jiang, will you die if you don't act stupid? With your brain, I've already explained it so clearly. How could you not have thought of it? Hui said angrily. Qin Feiyang smiled embarrassedly. Alas. Originally, we all thought that this Elder Cheng was a good person, and was not instigated by Feng Wenhai. However, in reality, he had already set a trap for us unknowingly. One is a battle maniac known as the Madman. The other is known as an arrogant and conceited person. The meeting of these two people is equivalent to Mars colliding with Earth. Our Elder Qing isn't simple at all. Hui sighed. Fire Lotus asked, You mean he wants to use the madman to get rid of us? Isn't this obvious? But he is also one step behind. Two people with similar personalities may not necessarily become opponents. They may also become friends. Hui smiled. Friends? Qin Rishwang and Fire Lotus heard this and turned to look at Qin Feiyang. They found that Qin Feiyang had a smile on his face. Could it be that the two of them would really become friends? Sword Peak Number 1. Duty Hall. Chengli leaned against the chair beside the tea table and leisurely sipped his tea. Disciples Jiang Haoyan, Jiang Rishwang, Jiang Fire Lotus, and Hui request to see Elder Cheng. Suddenly, several voices came from outside the door. Chengli was stunned and looked up at the door. He saw Qin Feiyang and the other three standing respectfully outside the door. What's going on? Looking at Qin Feiyang and the other three, the teacup in his hand almost fell to the ground. He had thought that the lunatic would at least give them a good beating, if not kill them. But now, the four of them were unharmed? What was going on? They did not fight? But how was this possible? As an outer sect elder, he knew the madman's temper better than anyone. Once the previous situation happened, they would definitely fight. Elder, what's wrong? Qin Feiyang and the other three looked at each other. A smile flashed in their eyes, but they looked at Chengli suspiciously. No. Chengli came back to his senses and quickly waved his hand. He asked with a smile, Why are you looking for me? Elder, didn't you say that after settling down we'll come to get the identity token? Qin Feiyang said. Yes. Chengli nodded repeatedly, got up and walked to the desk next to him. He said, Come in. Yes. The four of them walked into the hall one after another. Chengli also sat at the desk and took out 4 white tokens. The tokens were made of jade and could be as big as a baby's palm. On the front side, there was a flame pattern, and the back side was blank. Chengli said with a smile, "Tell me your names again." Jiang Haotian, Jiang Fire Lotus, Jiang Rishuang, Huai. The four of them spoke one after another. Chengli waved his fingers, and on the back side of the 4 tokens, the names of Qin Feiyang and the other 3 appeared. "This is your identity medallion," said Yi Futian. After Chengli said, he took out 4 Qiankuan bags and put them together with the 4 tokens. He said with a smile, "These are your clothes." "Thank you, Elder." Qin Feiyang and the other 3 stepped forward one by one and took their identity token and Qiankuan bags. "There's something that I have to remind you of. It doesn't matter what you wear outside, but in the Empyrean Palace, you must wear clothes with flame patterns. If you don't wear it, you will be punished. This is the rule. In addition, the Empyrean Palace forbids private fighting. If you have any grudges that you have to settle, you can go to the battlefield. Once you enter the battlefield, you can fight however you want. It doesn't matter even if you kill the other party," Chengli said. "Forbidding fighting?" Qin Feiyang and the other 3 frowned. Qin Feiyang said suspiciously, "Elder, since fighting is prohibited, why did that lunatic of our sword peak dare to fight in public?" "Did he fight?" Chengli was stunned. "Yes. Elder, you didn't know about the big commotion before?" Qin Feiyang said. "I didn't pay much attention to it just now. However, this lunatic is a little special. If you can bear with it, then bear with it. When I have time, I will also talk to him." Chengli laughed. "Didn't pay much attention?" Qin Feiyang and the other 3 looked at each other. This was really a lame excuse. However, they did not expose it in front of him. Chengli waved his hand and laughed. "All right, go. Disciple will take his leave." The 4 of them bowed respectfully, then turned around and walked out. Huai secretly said, "Did you guys notice that even this Chengli is a little afraid of that battle maniac?" The 3 of them nodded. Huai sent a sound transmission. "It seems that the identity of this lunatic needs to be investigated." "What is this?" Suddenly, Qin Feiyang turned his head to look at a black slate on the wall. The slate was 5 to 6 meters long, and there were rows of small words written on it. "That's the bulletin board. It's used to issue missions," Chengli said. "Bulletin board?" Qin Feiyang and the other 3 were stunned. "Look at the first line of missions. It's to find a ghost flower. The reward is 100 soul stones. In other words, as long as you find the ghost flower and hand it over to us, you will get 100 soul stones. And there is no upper limit. For example, if you hand over 100 ghost flowers, you will get 10,000 soul stones." Chengli explained with a smile. "So that's how it is." The 4 of them suddenly understood and looked at it one by one. On the bulletin board, even if it was looking for something. The missions issued by our outer sect are basically the simplest. There is not much risk. Of course, the reward is definitely much lower. Chengli said. Qin Rishuang asked curiously, "What about the inner and outer sect?" "The inner sect is definitely not comparable to the outer sect. The missions issued by the inner sect even include assassination. If you are not careful, you will lose your life. Of course, we will not let you kill good people. Those who are not listed as assassination targets are basically heinous people. As for the reward, there are missions as high as thousands, tens of thousands, and even hundreds of thousands," Chengli said. "So high?" The 4 of them were shocked. "Actually, to us elders, especially the people from the law enforcement hall, these missions are simply nothing. The reason why we do not do it and instead issue missions is to give you disciples a way to earn soul stones. On the other hand, it is also a training for you. However, you are now outer sect disciples. Although the reward for the missions issued by the inner sect is higher, it is still too much for you. So, do not bite off more than you can chew," Chengli warned. Qin Rishuang's eyes shone brightly as she asked, "In that case, outer sect disciples like us can also accept missions from the inner sect?" "No. I am warning you this as a precaution." Although outer sect disciples cannot accept missions from the inner sect, it is inevitable that they will have friends or relatives in the inner sect. In the past, there were many outer sect disciples who sought help from their friends or relatives in the inner sect in order to obtain more soul stones. However, this is very foolish. Many people have lost their lives because of this. Cheng-Li sighed. Then why don't you put an end to this? Qin Feiyang frowned. We have put an end to it. There are even clear rules that forbid inner sect disciples from doing this. But even so, we can't stop them. For example, the four of you. Jiang Haotian is in the inner sect. Jiang Rishuang, Jiang Fire Lotus, and Hui are in the outer sect. You will privately seek help from Jiang Haotian to accept missions from the inner sect and promise to give him a certain reward. If there is a reward, Jiang Haotian will definitely keep his mouth shut. If Jiang Haotian does not say anything, how would we elders know that he is actually helping you accept missions? So this kind of thing cannot be put an end to, Cheng-Li said. That's true. The four of them nodded. Chapter 1994. So, you must remember what I said. Don't touch the missions of the inner sect. Being down to earth is the right way. Cheng-Li smiled. Thank you for your teachings, elder. The four of them said gratefully. Go. Cheng-Li waved his hand and smiled. We'll take our leave. The four of them glanced at the bulletin board and left the hall. This Cheng-Li is really a smiling tiger. He cares so much about his disciples. I'm almost touched by him. Hui shook his head and sighed. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, We have to be on guard against this kind of person at all times. Fire Lotus said, Brother, I noticed that the mission of Death Fruit and Ghostwood was also posted on the bulletin board. I saw it too. These herbs can only be exchanged for 100 soul stones, just like the ghost flower. They're really cheap. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Hui was slightly stunned and said, 100 soul stones are already a lot, okay? Go to the treasure pavilion and see if they'll take out a soul stone. Treasure pavilion. Speaking of the treasure pavilion, Qin Feiyang thought of something. Why hadn't Sheng Guanqiu responded? Was it really that difficult to get the treasure pavilion to trade with soul stones? Not long after Qin Feiyang and the other three left, the young man in black and the others also came in. Everyone else leave first. One by one. Looking at the crowd, Cheng-Li frowned and said. Hearing this, everyone hurriedly left the main hall. Cheng-Li glanced at the young man in black standing by the table. He took out his token and asked, What's your name? Elder, my name is Ma Guang. The young man in black said respectfully. Cheng-Li asked calmly, Did something happen in your sword peak? This, Ma Guang looked hesitant. He was extremely wary of the strength that lunatic had shown. So he didn't know how to answer Cheng-Li. I think it's necessary to tell you that the fate of the outer sect disciples is in my hands. Cheng-Li said indifferently, his words carrying an undisguised threat. Ma Guang's eyes flickered as he blurted out, Something did happen. We were discussing how to split the cave when the guy called Maniac suddenly went crazy and forced us all to kneel on the ground. Are we talking or fighting? Cheng-Li Dao said. Disciple knows his mistake. Ma Guang's body trembled, and he quickly knelt on the ground. Cheng-Li raised his eyebrows. Don't you know that our Nine Heavens Palace forbids private fights? Disciple does not know. But this disciple already knows his mistake, and will not dare to do it again. Ma Guang said in a panic. Look at you. This elder didn't even say that I'm going to punish you and you're already so scared. Get up. Cheng-Li said indifferently. Thank you, elder. Ma Guang said gratefully. He stood up and looked at Cheng-Li with fear and trepidation. Cheng-Li asked, Was there any friction between that madman and Jiang Haotian back then? Yes. They even fought before, but lunatic's methods seemed to be useless against Jiang Haotian. Ma Guang did not dare to hide anything. He quickly recounted the situation back then. What? He can actually ignore lunatic's oppression. Cheng-Li was in disbelief. In the end, lunatic gave Jiang Haotian a note, but we don't know what's written on it. We only heard what they said at the end. Be there or be square. Ma Guang said. Be there or be square. Cheng-Li frowned. Elder, is this matter very important? Ma Guang asked cautiously. It's not important. Cheng-Li smiled and said, "How about this? This elder will give you a task." "Elder, please instruct. As long as this disciple can do it, I will not shirk my duty." Ma Guang bowed. This was a good opportunity to curry favor with Cheng-Li. In the future, help this elder more and pay attention to the movements of Lunatic and Jiang Haotian. If there's any situation, you have to inform this elder immediately. Cheng-Li said. Pay attention? Ma Guang was stunned. To put it nicely, pay attention. To put it bluntly, it was monitoring. But why did he have to monitor these two? Moreover, it didn't matter if he monitored others. But it had to be these two fierce people. If he was discovered by the other party, wouldn't he be in big trouble? To be able to enter the Nine Heavens Palace, how could Ma Guang be a foolish person? He really didn't want to do this kind of job. Cheng-Li said meaningfully. It seems that my words as an elder are not very useful. No. This disciple will definitely complete the mission. Ma Guang hurriedly waved his hand and promised. That's more like it. Do your job well for this elder. When the time comes, you won't be short of benefits. Cheng-Li chuckled. Thank you, elder. Ma Guang nodded and bowed, looking flattered. And then there was Qin Feiyang. After returning to the Sword Peak, Hua Yi returned to his cave. Qin Feiyang, on the other hand, brought Fire Lotus and Qin Rishuang into the castle, and excitedly sorted out the spoils of war. After half a day of sorting, the results were finally out. And half a day inside the castle was only a short while outside. I have a total of 275,000 soul stones here. If you add the cripple's 50,000, there will be a total of 330,000. Qin Rishuang said with a smile. White-Eyed Wolf, Mermaid Princess, and the rest of cripple's 50,000 soul stones had almost been refined. In total, I have over 400 million divine gems, said Li Qia. Fire Lotus also smiled. Not bad. Qin Feiyang nodded with satisfaction. What about you? The two girls looked at Qin Feiyang. They also have a lot of herbs and elixirs. Among them, the God Power Elixir and the Divine Life Elixir have the most herbs. There are also some herbs for the Life Elixir. However, there aren't any herbs for the other elixirs, such as the Heavenly Dust Elixir and the Four Elephants Infinite Elixir. I reckon that they are worth a few 100 million in total. As for the divine weapons and divine techniques, there are a few divine weapons, but they are all low-grade and middle-grade divine weapons. They aren't worth much. As for the divine techniques, there aren't any. Qin Feiyang smiled. Qin Rishuang said, Isn't there still that godly bow? Qin Feiyang took out the Sun Destroyer divine bow. Divine power surged and enveloped the entire ancient castle. He smiled and said, Our biggest gain this time, apart from the 330,000 soul stones, is this divine weapon. The Sun Destroyer divine bow was a pinnacle divine weapon that surpassed the supreme grade, so its value couldn't be measured by divine gems. Qin Rishuang and Fire Lotus looked at the Sun Destroyer divine bow with smiles in their eyes. But suddenly, Fire Lotus frowned and the smile in her eyes disappeared. She said in a low voice, Qin Dage, I suddenly thought of a problem. Go ahead. Qin Feiyang said. When we killed Nie Yun, although only Mu Tianyang and the other two were nearby, Feng Yuan and the other higher-ups must have seen it with their own eyes. We don't have to worry about Mu Tianyang and the other two. But this Feng Yuan, with his means, I think he will definitely reveal this matter to Nie Yun's father. At that time, the city lord of Star River City won't let it go. Fire Lotus said. Qin Feiyang looked at Fire Lotus in surprise and praised. Not bad, you can think of so many things. Huo Yin chuckled. Actually, I also thought about this problem. But what does it matter? We are now in Ninth Heaven Palace. Even if the city lord of Star River City wants to avenge Nie Yun, he has no chance. Qin Feiyang smiled. Huo Yin asked. Then, what if the city lord has any relatives or friends in the Nine Heavens Palace? We don't cause trouble, but we are not afraid of trouble. Do you understand? Qin Feiyang asked with a smile. We don't cause trouble, but we are not afraid of trouble. Fire Lotus pondered for a while and nodded with a smile. I understand. Boom. At this time, a powerful godly aura burst out all of a sudden. Qin Feiyang and the other two were stunned. They turned their heads and saw that the divine aura came from Zhao Tailai. I finally broke through, Qin Feiyang muttered. Zhao Tailai's aura had already risen to the level of an early-stage war god. Boom. Following closely, Tang Hai's aura also erupted. He also broke through? Qin Feiyang was stunned. This way, he had two more early-stage war gods by his side. Young master. A moment later, Tang Hai and the other two retracted their aura, opened their eyes and looked at Qin Feiyang excitedly. In the Black Tortoise world, they didn't even dare to think about becoming an early-stage war god. But ever since they followed this young man in front of them, not only did they break the shackles of the demon imprint and step into the war god realm, but they also stepped into the early-stage war god realm in such a short period of time. It was like a dream. The cultivation of an early-stage war god is far from enough in the ancient world. Continue to work hard. As for the soul stone, you don't need to think about it. Qin Feiyang smiled. Yes. The two nodded. They were extremely touched. Even the treasure pavilion was reluctant to use the soul stone to trade. But Qin Feiyang let them refine it without holding back. Where else could they find such a good young master in today's world? The decision back then was indeed correct. This man was someone worthy of them following, pledging their loyalty, and protecting. Qin Feiyang looked at Qin Rishwang and smiled. You should also hurry up and cultivate. I know even without you telling me. Ever since she knew that Qin Batian was still alive, Qin Rishwang's desire for strength was unprecedentedly strong. If it wasn't for the assessment, she would have entered the ancient castle and refined the soul stone. Qin Feiyang smiled and appeared in the Black Tortoise world with Fire Lotus. Fire Lotus looked suspiciously at Qin Feiyang and said, Qin Dage, why aren't you refining the soul stone in the ancient castle? It's still far from enough. Look at the Blood Kirin. The reason why it hasn't become a god of war is because it didn't have enough soul stones before. Now, although we have obtained quite a lot, it still requires 100,000 soul stones to become a god of war. In other words, just the Blood Kirin will consume 1/3 of what we obtained this time. If I refine more, how much will I have left? Qin Feiyang said sadly. Hearing this, Fire Lotus looked at Qin Feiyang in a daze. Why are you looking at me like that? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. You would rather not have it, and give it to your subordinates first. The Blood Kirin and the others are so lucky to have met such a good young master. Fire Lotus shook her head and smiled. They have followed me through life and death. Of course, I can't treat them badly. Plus, if they become stronger, I will become stronger as well. It doesn't matter who refines the soul stone. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. Fire Lotus's eyes flashed with a strange light when she heard this. At first, she didn't feel anything other than gratitude towards Qin Feiyang. Because at that time, Qin Feiyang had allowed her to absorb the souls of the dead in the desert and form a physical body. But during this period of time, as she got along with him, she realized that this man had an irresistible charm that could captivate people at any time and place. This made her gradually become addicted to him. Now there was an uncontrollable desire in her heart. She wished that she was this man's sister. If that was the case, then she would be very happy for the rest of her life. Chapter 1995. Qin Feiyang didn't know what Fire Lotus was thinking. He lowered his head and didn't say anything. The problem he had to deal with now wasn't just the soul stone and the herbs for the undead bottleneck-breaking elixir. There was also the elixir fire and the elixir furnace. Relatively speaking, the elixir fire and the elixir furnace were more important. After all, even if they found the herbs for the elixir, they couldn't refine it without the elixir fire and the elixir furnace. After a moment of silence, Qin Feiyang turned to Fire Lotus and said with a smile, Girl, help me go to the treasure pavilion. Treasure pavilion? Fire Lotus was stunned. Yes. Go to Shangguanqiu and buy 2 9th-grade elixir fires and a divine elixir furnace. Qin Feiyang said. Aren't you waiting for her to come to you? Fire Lotus was suspicious. These are 2 different things. Besides, we have a lot of divine gems now. It should be enough to buy these things. Also, if you have extra divine gems, buy some teleportation altars. Qin Feiyang said with a smile. Okay, I'll go now. Fire Lotus nodded. Qin Feiyang then took out a few teleportation altars and handed them to Fire Lotus. He then sent Fire Lotus out. He then closed his eyes and extended his senses infinitely. Soon he found Dan Wangkai. As for the teleportation altars, there were 30 or 40 of them in the interspatial rings of Nieyun and the others. But of course, the more the better. At this moment, Dan Wangkai was like an ordinary person living in a small mountain village. He worked when the sun rose and rested when the sun set. In other words, Dan Wangkai was still in the state of meditation. The so-called meditation was to calm down one's heart. This was the first step to becoming a god. In other words, Dan Wangkai hadn't really started to understand the profound meaning of becoming a god. What's going on? Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. After so many years, why was he still at the first step? Wait. After so many years? Qin Feiyang couldn't help but smile bitterly. Many years had indeed passed in the castle. However, the Black Tortoise World's time laws were the same as the outside world. As for Dan Wangkai, it was only after he entered the ancient world that he started cultivating in seclusion. After breaking through to the peak 9-star combat emperor realm, he came to the Black Tortoise World to comprehend the profundity of ascension. In other words, Dan Wangkai had only been in the Black Tortoise World for a few days. How could he possibly comprehend the profound meaning of becoming a deity in just a few days? One had to know that back then. Even he had taken half a year to comprehend it. Good luck, Qin Feiyang murmured. Without Dan Wangkai by his side, he instantly felt the pressure double. Because Dan Wangkai was not here, he had to personally refine the pills. Although refining pills was simple, it was actually the most time-consuming and exhausting laborious work. Buzz. Suddenly, the image crystal buzzed. Qin Feiyang took out the image crystal and Gong Zifeng's shadow condensed. Big brother Jiang, I have already secretly revealed the news of you entering the 9-Heaven Palace to Feng Zijuan. Gong Zifeng immediately laughed. So fast? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Of course we have to be efficient. Moreover, the person we are targeting is Feng Zijuan, so we definitely can't be negligent. Gong Zifeng chuckled. Qin Feiyang couldn't help but laugh, and asked, then what was his reaction? His reaction is funny. First, he was surprised, then he looked like he was going to bite someone. Gong Zifeng said. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and said, coincidentally, there are a few things that I would like to ask you about. You're being too polite by saying that you're asking for advice. If you have any questions, just say it. As long as I know, I won't hide anything. Gong Zifeng said. Qin Feiyang said, who is this lunatic from the outer sect? Lunatic? Gong Zifeng was stunned and frowned. Are you talking about the lunatic who occupies a sword peak by himself? Qin Feiyang nodded. How do you know him? Gong Zifeng was shocked. I am living with him now. Not long ago, after you sent me a message, I had a small conflict with him. Qin Feiyang was helpless. Gong Zifeng was stunned. Qin Feiyang frowned. Who is this person? Gong Zifeng came back to his senses and said in a low voice, Big brother Jiang, you can't provoke this person. If there was a conflict just now, you have to apologize to him. Is it that serious? Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. It's more serious than what I said. This lunatic is an extremely belligerent person. Anyone who is targeted by him can't escape even if they want to. Moreover, his character is very irritable. Doesn't the 9-Heaven Palace have a rule that forbids fighting? But this rule is useless against this person. As long as his temper flares up, regardless of the occasion, he will immediately start a fight. Gong Zifeng said. He's so reckless. Don't the higher-ups care about it? Qin Feiyang frowned. Care? Gong Zifeng shook his head and smiled. No one dares to care. Why do you say so? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. This lunatic's real name, identity, and strength are all a mystery. No one knows. Even my grandfather and the others know nothing about it. It is said that he grew up in the 9-Heaven Palace and was very naughty when he was young. In the past, there were many elders who wanted to punish him because of anger. But every time when they wanted to punish him, the great elder would personally come forward and plead for him. Gong Zifeng said. The great elder pleaded for him? Qin Feiyang's expression was dazed. This was really beyond his expectations. However, although the great elder has helped him time and time again, neither that madman nor the great elder himself have revealed their relationship. As a result, many people are guessing whether this lunatic is the great elder's illegitimate son. Or maybe he is the great elder's disciple. In short, there are different opinions. Gong Zifeng said. Qin Feiyang was stunned and shook his head with a smile. This Nine Heaven Palace is really an interesting place. Interesting? I'm afraid only you would think so. Gong Zifeng shook his head. Qin Feiyang said. Let's not talk about the lunatic first. Do you know about the Nine Heaven Palace's cemetery? What? Cemetery? Gong Zifeng's eyes widened and he said in shock. Brother Jiang, why are you asking about this? Qin Feiyang said. I heard that there are death fruit and yin soul wood in the Nine Heaven Palace's cemetery. My dear brother, even if there are these herbs in the cemetery, you can't have any ideas about the cemetery. That's a forbidden area of our Nine Heaven Palace. Let me tell you this, if you are discovered, even if you are the great elder's son, you can forget about leaving alive. The resource hall has the death fruit and yin soul wood. Why do you want to go further? Gong Zifeng was speechless. I also thought about it. But with my relationship with your grandfather, going to the resource hall is tantamount to asking for humiliation. Qin Feiyang said. That's true. Gong Zifeng nodded and frowned. Then you can also go to the treasure hall. I don't have so many divine gems on me now. Qin Feiyang was helpless. If you don't have divine gems, you can slowly earn them. Gong Zifeng was somewhat helpless. Without divine gems, he wanted to go to the cemetery? Wasn't he eating a leopard's guts? Wait a minute. Listening to this person's tone, it seemed that he couldn't wait. Gong Zifeng asked. Are you in urgent need of these two things? Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. I got it. Don't go to the cemetery. Leave this matter to me. After Gong Zifeng finished speaking, he turned off the image crystal. Qin Feiyang was stunned. Obviously, Gong Zifeng wanted to help him get yin soul wood and death fruit. To be honest, he really didn't mean that. However, if Gong Zifeng could really get yin soul wood and death fruit, it would be a great help to him. Putting away the image crystal, Qin Feiyang left the Black Tortoise realm and appeared in the cave. At this moment, a young man in black stood outside the door, pacing back and forth. After a while, the young man in black gritted his teeth and knocked hard on the stone door. Qin Feiyang, who was inside the cave, was stunned, and with a wave of his hand, the stone door quickly opened. It's you? Qin Feiyang was surprised. The young man in black looked at Qin Feiyang with some fear and asked, Senior brother Jiang, can I come in? Qin Feiyang smiled and said, Sure, come in. The young man in black was Ma Guang. Ma Guang heard and immediately ran into the cave. Qin Feiyang asked with a smile, Senior brother, what's the matter? Ma Guang quickly waved his hand and said, Don't call me that, just call me by my name. My name is Ma Guang. Qin Feiyang became more and more suspicious. Why did this person suddenly become so polite? Ma Guang looked outside the cave warily and said in a low voice, Brother Jiang, can we close the door and talk? Okay. Qin Feiyang nodded and waved his hand again, and the stone door quickly closed again. Ma Guang said, Brother Jiang, to be honest, I have been struggling with this matter for a long time before I decided to tell you. What's so serious? Qin Feiyang frowned. Ma Guang said in a deep voice, It's about Chengli, which is our outer sect elder. Chengli? Qin Feiyang stared blankly for a moment before his interest was piqued. Ma Guang said, He is asking about your situation, and also asked me to secretly monitor you and Frenzy. Monitor? Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. Brother Jiang, don't be angry, I was completely forced to do this. At that time, when I went to get the identity token, he threatened me that if I didn't agree, I would definitely suffer in the future. Ma Guang panicked. It's understandable. Qin Feiyang smiled slightly and asked doubtfully, Then why did you secretly tell me? To be honest, I don't dare to offend Chengli. but I also don't dare to offend you in frenzy. So after thinking about it, I decided to tell you the truth. Ma Guang sighed. Qin Feiyang patted Ma Guang's shoulder and said with a smile, "It's been hard on you. Thank you for your understanding, Brother Jiang. Then, Brother Jiang, how should we deal with this matter? After all, Cheng-Li is an outer sect elder, and he controls the fate of us outer sect disciples. We really can't afford to offend him." Ma Guang was melancholic. "What else can we do? You can only listen to him, monitor me in frenzy, and report everything to him truthfully." Qin Feiyang smiled. Ma Guang said, "But," Qin Feiyang said, "don't worry, since you are so honest, I definitely won't blame you. Brother Jiang is really benevolent and righteous. But Frenzy, you also know that Frenzy's character. If he knows that I am monitoring him, I am afraid that even if I don't die, I will lose a layer of skin." Ma Guang was worried. "As for Frenzy, if there is a chance, I will help you talk to him. Although this person is belligerent, he should be a reasonable person." Qin Feiyang smiled. Chapter 1996. Hearing this, Ma Guang was overjoyed. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, Brother Jiang. If you need any help in the future, please let me know." "That's what you said. Don't go back on your word." Qin Feiyang smiled. "Once a word has been spoken, it cannot be taken back." Ma Guang patted his chest and vowed. But after thinking for a while, he smiled and said, "Of course, Brother Jiang, you can't ask me to do something that will get me killed." Qin Feiyang shook his head and laughed. "Although I asked you to report truthfully, there are some things that you need to think about." "Understood." Ma Guang nodded. It was obvious that Jiang Chen was telling him to say what he should say, and not say what he shouldn't say. Qin Feiyang's eyes carried a trace of a smile. Ma Guang was indeed a smart man. Maybe he could buy him over and use him. Of course, he didn't want to keep Ma Guang by his side. After all, the people and beasts around him already gave him a headache. After thinking for a while, Qin Feiyang glanced at Ma Guang's hands, and found that he wasn't wearing an interspatial ring. So he had an idea. He took out an interspatial ring and handed it to Ma Guang with a smile. "Brother Ma, this is a little gift from me. Please accept it." "This?" Ma Guang stared at the interspatial ring in shock. An interspatial ring was priced at 10 million divine gems in the treasure school. Even if an outer disciple had enough divine gems, he wouldn't be willing to buy an interspatial ring with 10 million divine gems. So, outer sect disciples basically used Qianquan bags. Qin Feiyang stuffed the interspatial ring into Ma Guang's hands, and said with a smile, "Just a little gift from me. Don't mind it." "No, no, no." Ma Guang quickly waved his hands and was overjoyed. What a windfall. And for Qin Feiyang, an interspatial ring was nothing. Because this time, Nie Yun and the other 5's interspatial rings all fell into his hands. In other words, including the one he gave to Fire Lotus, he now had 8 interspatial rings. Whoosh. Just as Ma Guang happily put away the universe ring, and was about to thank Qin Feiyang, a woman wearing a mask landed in front of the cave with a piercing sound. Then, without knocking on the door, she directly pushed open the stone door and entered the cave. It was the Fire Lotus. Fire Lotus was stunned when she saw Ma Guang. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "Brother Ma, I still have some matters to attend to, so I won't see you out." "All right." Ma Guang nodded and tactfully turned around to leave. What is he doing here? After Ma Guang left, Fire Lotus closed the stone door and looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. Qin Feiyang briefly explained the situation. This Cheng-Li is indeed a treacherous villain. Fire Lotus snorted coldly as a cold light flashed in her eyes. "Let's not talk about him for now. Where's the alchemy fire and alchemy furnace?" Qin Feiyang looked at the Fire Lotus expectantly. However, Fire Lotus lowered her head, her eyes full of anger and self-blame. Qin Feiyang's eyelids twitched as he asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" "I'm useless. I couldn't buy the alchemy fire and alchemy furnace," Fire Lotus said. "Why didn't you buy them?" Qin Feiyang was suspicious. "Shengguan Qiu won't sell them. She also told us not to go to the treasure pavilion to look for her in the future," Fire Lotus said angrily. "Won't sell them?" Qin Feiyang frowned. The treasure pavilion was open for business. How could they do such a thing? It's true. I asked her the reason, but she didn't say anything. If I didn't leave, I would probably be chased out by her. Huo Lian's face was filled with anger. That's strange. What's the reason? Could it be that she's dissatisfied with the negotiation last time? Qin Feiyang mumbled. But even if the negotiation failed, it shouldn't be that bad. Fire Lotus said. Qin Dage, do you want me to go again? No need. Since Shangguan Qiu has already rejected it, it's useless no matter how many times you go. Qin Feiyang shook his head and then looked at Fire Lotus, whose eyes were full of self-blame, and said with a smile, You don't have to blame yourself. There must be another reason for this. Hearing this and looking at the smile on Qin Feiyang's face, Fire Lotus felt much better. You didn't buy the teleportation altar? Qin Feiyang asked. Fire Lotus nodded. Is this considered a ban on me? Interesting. Qin Feiyang smiled, but there was a trace of anger in his eyes. Negotiating a deal was a very common thing. After all, it was a deal. Both parties had to be satisfied. But because of this, the treasure pavilion had banned him. He would remember this debt. Right. When I came back just now, I met a middle-aged man near the Sword Peak. He asked me to give this to you. Huo Lian suddenly thought of something. She took out a neatly folded piece of paper from her bosom and handed it to Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang was stunned. He took the note and asked suspiciously, What's written on it? I didn't read it. Fire Lotus shook her head. Qin Feiyang opened the note and was immediately stunned. There were only 7 words on the note. Find out the truth. The remaining 4 words were a name. Shangguan Fenglan. What does this mean? Fire Lotus was also stunned when she saw the content of the note. Find out the truth. Shangguan Fenglan. Qin Feiyang murmured. Suddenly, a light flashed in his eyes. Then he clenched his fist and the note was immediately crushed. Fire Lotus looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. Qin Feiyang looked at the Fire Lotus and said with a sigh, Lass, the deep meaning hidden in these few words isn't simple. Not simple? Fire Lotus frowned. Find out the truth? What truth? The truth, of course, is that I slandered Jiutian Palace. In other words, this Shangguan Fenglan already knew that I was framed. Qin Feiyang said. Fire Lotus was slightly stunned. She was pleasantly surprised. This is a good thing. Finally, someone can clear our name. A good thing? I don't think so. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled. Why? Fire Lotus was puzzled. Since Shangguan Fenglan knows that we've been wrongly accused, she must also know who's framing us. But why didn't she say it directly? And when we were on the stairway, she didn't mention it at all. Instead, she forced us to apologize. And now, she wants us to investigate the truth ourselves. Girl, this matter is not simple. Qin Feiyang said. Fire Lotus guessed. Maybe she doesn't have any evidence, so she wants us to investigate it ourselves? Even if she doesn't have any evidence, she can clear our name first. But she didn't do that. Do you know what this means? It means that she wants to deal with Feng Wenhai, Qin Feiyang said solemnly. What? Fire Lotus was shocked. She said angrily. If that's the case, then isn't she using us? Yes, she is using us. Qin Feiyang nodded. Is there a need for that? She is the hall master of the tribunal hall. Isn't it easy for her to deal with Feng Wenhai? Fire Lotus frowned. But don't forget that Feng Wenhai's father is the hall master of the resource hall. He controls all the resources of Empyrean Palace. In terms of status in Empyrean Palace, the two can be said to be equal. With such a powerful background, Shangguan Fenglan dares to deal with Feng Wenhai openly? Qin Feiyang sneered. She doesn't dare, and she can't use us. With our little strength, how can we win against Feng Wenhai? Fire Lotus was furious. This was simply pushing them into a fire pit. Qin Feiyang shook his head and sighed. That's why I said this matter isn't simple. Empyrean Palace isn't as peaceful as we think. Then what do you plan to do? Fire Lotus was worried. You know why I joined Empyrean Palace, so I don't want to get involved in this mess. Even if I have to bear the crime of slandering Empyrean Palace, even if everyone looks at me strangely, I don't care. Qin Feiyang said. Then should we go and refuse? Fire Lotus said. Refuse? Girl, you're too naive. If we really refuse, I'm afraid not only Feng Yuan, but also Shangguan Fenglan will fall out with us. What kind of situation will we face at that time? You should be able to imagine. Qin Feiyang smiled bitterly. Fire Lotus said angrily, we can't do this, and we can't do that. Are we just going to be used by her? Don't worry. Don't you know me? Without a price, how can I help her? Don't worry about this matter, I'll deal with it. Qin Feiyang comforted. What about the alchemy fire and alchemy furnace? Fire Lotus asked. That's even simpler. The person the treasure pavilion wants to ban is me. When the time comes, I'll ask old Zhao and old Tang to go. Won't it be solved? Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. That's true. Tang Hai and Zhao Tailai haven't seen each other since they entered the ancient world. No matter how powerful Shangguan Qiu is, he definitely won't know it's your people. Fire Lotus said in realization. Smart. Qin Feiyang smiled. You've already said it so clearly. If I still don't understand, then I'm a pig. After Fire Lotus finished speaking, she suddenly seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly said, by the way, when I came back just now, I saw Lunatic. Really? Qin Feiyang was surprised. Yes. When I came back, he just came out of cave abode number 1. But he was too fast, so I didn't see his face clearly. Fire Lotus said. He's indeed a battle maniac. He can't wait for a moment. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled. From what you said, you seem to know that he's going out. Fire Lotus said in surprise. I know a little. I'm going out for a while. I might not be back until very late. Don't run around because Gongzi Feng might send someone to find me. Qin Feiyang smiled mysteriously and reminded her softly. Very late. Fire Lotus was surprised and asked suspiciously. What are you going to do? I'll tell you when I come back. Qin Feiyang said. Being so mysterious is definitely not a good thing. Fire Lotus pursed her lips and reminded. You can't open the altar in the 9th Heaven Palace. You have to go out through the heaven stairway. Can't open the altar? Qin Feiyang was surprised. Yes. When I went to the treasure pavilion, I wanted to open the altar and teleport directly, but I found that I couldn't. So I went out to ask around. It's just as Gao Xiaolong said. There's an invisible barrier around the 9th Heaven Palace that can block the altar's teleportation. You can only go in and out through the heaven stairway. Fire Lotus explained. I see. Qin Feiyang nodded in realization and reached out his hand. Give me the divine crystals. Fire Lotus took out a universe pouch and handed it to Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang grabbed the universe pouch and teleported out of the cave abode at lightning speed, flying toward the heaven stairway. When he walked down the heaven stairway and passed by the white-haired old man, Qin Feiyang glanced at the white-haired old man. Then he opened a teleportation altar and disappeared without a trace. Chapter 1997. Sky Dragon City. Outside the city. In a dense forest, Qin Feiyang appeared out of thin air. Following closely, with a wave of his hand, 2 middle-aged men appeared. It was Zhao Tailai and Tang Hai. Greetings, young master. The two bowed. Qin Feiyang asked, Did you hear the conversation between Fire Lotus and I? Yes. The two nodded. Good, the divine crystals are all inside. Go to the treasure pavilion. You must complete the mission. Qin Feiyang threw the Qingkuan bag to the two of them. Yes. The two of them respectfully responded and turned to walk towards Sky Dragon City. After watching the two of them leave, Qin Feiyang opened another altar and quickly left. With Tang Hai and Zhao Tailai handling things, he was at ease. Sky Dragon Sea. On the coast, a black-clothed youth stood proudly on a huge rock with his hands behind his back. He was about 1.8 meters tall, with a jade-like appearance, eyes like pearls and 2 thick eyebrows, like a knife, made his eyes look extremely sharp. Woo-woo. Waves of sea breeze blew. A head of thick black hair wantonly fluttered behind him. He was like a god with an extraordinary temperament, and the aura he exuded was extremely terrifying. And on his chest there was also a flame pattern. Swish. A white-clothed youth suddenly appeared in the sky. On his clothes, there was also a flame pattern. The white-clothed youth glanced around, lowered his head to look at the black-clothed youth standing on the huge rock, and laughed. "You are indeed here." The black-clothed youth looked up and grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth, and said, "Didn't we agree to meet at night? Didn't you already come? Then I naturally can't let you wait here." The white-clothed youth laughed. "Ha!" The black-clothed youth laughed, and said, "After the agreement I really couldn't stay in the cave, so I decided to come first." "That's right. These two people, one was Qin Feiyang, the other was the madman in cave number 1. And at that time, the madman gave Qin Feiyang a note, was actually a challenge, as well as the coordinates of this place. Originally, they made an appointment for the evening, but when he heard Fire Lotus say that madman had left the cave, Qin Feiyang guessed that he must have come here. As expected, he couldn't even wait for half a day. Just how battle-hungry was this guy? "Actually, I'm quite surprised too," madman said again. "What accident?" Qin Feiyang was suspicious. "Originally, I thought that you would reject my challenge, but I didn't expect that you would agree without hesitation." Madman said, "If it were anyone else, I would definitely refuse. Because I'm not interested in such a boring and meaningless game. But for a battle maniac like you, I can't refuse because if I don't agree, you will definitely not stop. So, I might as well fight with you, so that I can have some peace in the future," Qin Feiyang said helplessly. "Ha!" The madman laughed loudly and said, "Do you hate people like me?" "A little." Qin Feiyang did not deny it. "I like your straightforward personality. Follow me." Madman took a step forward and rushed into the endless sea without looking back. "And?" Qin Feiyang frowned and chased after him, asking, "Isn't it here? This place is too close to the Nine Heavens Palace. I don't want anyone to come and cause trouble when I'm fighting," Madman said. Qin Feiyang was a little helpless. The two of them, one in front and one behind, cut through the sky and went deep into the Sky Dragon Sea. Isn't that madman? Why did he come to the Sky Dragon Sea? And the person next to him, he also seems a little familiar. Wait. He seems to be the fierce person who cheated Feng Zijuan. That's right, it's him, Jiang Haotian. Why would these two people enter the Sky Dragon Sea together? Let's go and take a look. Along the way, Qin Feiyang and Madman met many people. These people were basically disciples of the Nine Heavens Palace, training at the edge of the Sky Dragon Sea. About half an hour passed. Behind the two of them, at least 200 to 300 people followed. This made Qin Feiyang involuntarily frown. Madman glanced at Qin Feiyang's expression, turned around, stared at those disciples and shouted, "Scram at once, otherwise I'll destroy you all." Hearing this, the 200 to 300 people immediately dispersed in an uproar. Their expressions were filled with fear. "Impressive." Qin Feiyang looked at Madman in admiration and said with a smile. Madman smiled smugly and continued to rush forward. The sea was very calm. The warm sun and refreshing sea breeze made people feel especially comfortable. And along the way, they did not see a single sea beast. It was very hard to imagine that such a peaceful Sky Dragon Sea would be the Northern Domain's largest forbidden area. Don't underestimate this place. Although we didn't see any sea beasts, they are looking at us. It's just that with me around, they don't dare to show their heads, Madman said. Qin Feiyang was stunned and immediately released his divine sense, surging towards the sea below. Sure enough, under the sea, there were countless sea beasts staring at them. He was even more shocked. Just how terrifying was this madman's strength? Even these ferocious sea beasts were so afraid of him. Basically, all the sea beasts in this sea have been beaten up by me, Madman suddenly said, causing Qin Feiyang's jaw to almost drop. If that was really the case, then this guy in front of him was undoubtedly a madman. How far is it? Qin Feiyang calmed down the shock in his heart and asked. We're almost there, Madman said without turning his head. About 100 breaths later, an island gradually entered Qin Feiyang's sight. That island was huge, and even with Qin Feiyang's current cultivation, he couldn't see the end. It was like a continent standing on the sea. That island is shaped like a sea turtle, so I named it Turtle King Island. Turtle King Island is our battlefield. And ordinary opponents are not qualified to step into Turtle King Island. Madman said. In that case, I have to feel honored? Qin Feiyang was stunned. You should indeed feel honored. Because you are the third person to step onto this island. Madman said. While talking, the two had already entered the sky above Turtle King Island, but Madman didn't stop and continued to fly towards the depths of the island. Third. Then who were the first two? Qin Feiyang asked suspiciously. The first person is naturally me. Because Turtle King Island is my exclusive battlefield. Without my permission, not to mention the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace, even elder-level figures don't dare to step into this place. The second person is a woman called Feng Zihan, the #1 expert on the heaven list. Madman said. Feng Zihan, Qin Feiyang murmured. Isn't this woman the elder sister of young noble Feng? And she seems to be the master of the Jade Zither Pavilion. Qin Feiyang asked calmly. You fought with Feng Zihan before? Madman nodded. Then how is her strength? In the end, did you win or did she win? Qin Feiyang was curious. How can the #1 on the heaven list be weak? As for the end, I lost. Madman said. #1 on the heaven list? Qin Feiyang frowned. This so-called heaven list, he really didn't know what the situation was. Everyone on the heaven list is an existence that all the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace look up to. There are only a total of 10 people on the heaven list. Being on the heaven list is not only a proof of strength, but you can also get more resources. Let's put it bluntly. Those who are on the heaven list are the future Palace Master, Vice Palace Master, and the candidates for the top 10 elders. Madman said. Qin Feiyang was dumbfounded. He didn't expect the heaven list to be so valuable. What about the earth list? Qin Feiyang asked again. The earth list is a bit inferior. However, they are also candidates for the future Palace Master. Madman said. Qin Feiyang was secretly speechless. Madman suddenly grinned and said with disdain. Actually, it's not a big deal. Qin Feiyang was stunned. Madman said. What candidates? What resources? I don't care about it. Even if you don't care about it, there are a lot of people who care about it. Qin Feiyang was speechless. Madman said in disdain. Those people are all idiots. Isn't it good to be free in life? Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled. He didn't expect this person to have such an indifferent temperament. It's really rare. Hold on. You just said that those who are on the heaven list can get more resources. How much is this more? Qin Feiyang asked. How should I put this? Madman pondered for a while and said, let's put it this way. The #1 on the heaven list can receive 1 million soul stones every month. What? 1 million? Qin Feiyang was dumbfounded. As an outer disciple, he could only receive 10 soul stones every month. 10 soul stones and 1 million soul stones. How many times was the difference? It was 100,000 times. Many people would often say that there was a huge difference between the two of them. At this moment, Qin Feiyang truly experienced this difference. We're here. Just as Qin Feiyang was in a daze, Madman's voice sounded. Qin Feiyang was taken aback and quickly came back to his senses. He looked around. This should be the center of Turtle King Island. The entire Turtle King Island was filled with mountains and rivers, but not a single blade of grass grew. It was filled with a desolate aura. There was no trace of a sea beast. There was dead silence all around. Madman took a step forward and landed half a mile away. He turned to face Qin Feiyang and said, Are you ready? Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and nodded to Madman. Boom. Madman was the first to erupt with an aura. But this aura was only at the level of a low-level war god. What are you doing? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. Since it's a spar, it naturally has to be fair. Now, whether it is my divine power or the strength of my body, they are all suppressed to the same level as you. In addition, in this spar, we won't use divine weapons. We will rely on our own methods. Madman said. What about divine arts and battle souls? Qin Feiyang asked. Of course. Madman nodded. The corner of Qin Feiyang's mouth lifted slightly and he said with a smile, "Then you might lose." "Haha." Madman suddenly laughed out loud. His eyes suddenly became sharp like blades as he said word by word, "As long as you have the ability." Boom. Qin Feiyang didn't say anything else as divine power surged out. Chapter 1998. Shua. Just as Qin Feiyang released his aura, the madman took a step forward and arrived in front of Qin Feiyang, slapping out with his palm. Qin Feiyang moved his feet and easily avoided it. Seeing that Qin Feiyang didn't fight head-on, the madman couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He turned around and clenched his fist, punching towards Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang's figure flashed again and again. In the same realm, he wasn't afraid of anyone, including speed. "What do you mean?" The madman was furious. Divine power surged out and blocked all of Qin Feiyang's escape routes. Then he punched towards Qin Feiyang. This scene seemed to be out of Qin Feiyang's expectations. He looked slightly flustered. He hurriedly raised his arm and slapped out. Seeing Qin Feiyang finally make a move, the madman's eyes flashed with anticipation. Yes, he was looking forward to the appearance of the golden light, which was the return formula. However, the golden light he was looking forward to did not appear. The fist and palm met in an instant. Humph! Qin Feiyang let out a muffled groan as his body shook. Immediately after, he was like a meteorite, smashing into the mountains below. Boom! A majestic mountain range that was thousands of feet tall collapsed in an instant. The madman was stunned. What about the golden light? Below, Qin Feiyang climbed out of the dust. His face was as pale as paper. He looked up at the madman and said, "You won." "Won?" The madman's face was dull. Immediately after, a monstrous anger roared out. The madman roared, "What kind of joke is this? Who was the one who confidently said that I might lose? Now it's over? Do you think I'm stupid? Why don't you pretend a bit more?" "I'm not pretending." Qin Feiyang shook his head. "Then tell me, why didn't the golden light that reflected my divine power in the morning appear? Such a heaven-defying method hasn't even been used yet, and you dare to admit defeat. Do you really think I'm a fool?" The madman's hair stood up in anger. His body was full of hostility. Don't misunderstand. That golden light is indeed very powerful, but it can only be used once a day." Qin Feiyang said. "Once?" The madman raised his eyebrows. "Yes." Qin Feiyang nodded. "Then we'll wait. Let's spar tomorrow." The madman said. "What?" Qin Feiyang looked at madman in shock. He thought that the madman would stop after hearing this, but he didn't expect that he still wanted to fight. That's right. He came here purely as a show to satisfy his desires as a battle desire. But now he still didn't stop. There was still didn't still this madman simply sat cross-legged in the air. He looked at Qin Feiyang and coldly snorted. "Before dawn, none of us are allowed to leave Turtle King Island. Restricting my freedom?" Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. But the madman didn't pay attention to him and closed his eyes. Qin Feiyang frowned. It seemed that he couldn't avoid this battle. "Madman." Qin Feiyang suddenly spoke. The madman still ignored him. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed with a cold light as he slapped out with his palm. Golden light rolling out. The madman suddenly opened his eyes and they flickered. Qin Feiyang said, "Since you insist on fighting, then I'll accompany you, but there has to be a prize." "Are you playing with me?" The madman turned a deaf ear and stared at Qin Feiyang, his eyes full of killing intent. "Playing with you? There's no need for that. I just don't want to do something meaningless." Qin Feiyang shook his head. "As long as you're willing to go all out, I can satisfy you." The madman raised the corner of his mouth and laughed. "Sure enough, you're a battle maniac. If you lose to me, you have to do something for me unconditionally. Similarly, if I lose to you, I have to do something for you as well." Qin Feiyang said. "No need. If you lose to me, you have to give me that technique that can reflect divine power." The madman said. "Deal." Qin Feiyang nodded. "Haha. Straightforward enough, confident enough. Let's fight. The madman laughed, and with surging divine power, he threw a punch at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang didn't dodge anymore. He took a step into the sky and threw a punch at the madman. Neither of them used divine power. Boom! The two fists collided with a loud bang. A destructive aura, like a tide, surged out in all directions with the two as the center. The surrounding void was crazily shattered. Ha! Both of their eyes revealed a trace of surprise at the same time. The madman said, "You've tempered your body?" "Yes." Qin Feiyang nodded and said, "You've tempered your body too?" "Yes." The madman nodded. "Haha." The two laughed at the same time, waved their fists, and began a physical battle. Bang! Bang! Rumble! The sound of fists colliding was like thunder from the 9 heavens, resounding in all directions. Outside Turtle King Island, above the sea, a group of people gathered here, looking at Turtle King Island curiously. These people were the disciples of 9 Heaven Palace that were driven away before, but later, they quietly followed behind. They had already sensed the battle fluctuations inside. But because Turtle King Island was too big and Qin Feiyang and the madman were in the central area of Turtle King Island, they couldn't see the situation inside. Why are they fighting? You still don't know the temper of the madman. Who can escape from him? But then again, for Jiang Haoyan to be invited to Turtle King Island by the madman, his strength definitely can't be underestimated. I used to think that this person had an undeserved reputation, but now it seems that he really has some ability. Aren't you talking nonsense? Is Turtle King Island a place that ordinary people can enter? In the past, only Feng Zihan had entered. Feng Zihan, that's the #1 powerhouse on the heaven list. Even some elders are inferior to her. Even now, I still remember that the last time the madman and Feng Zihan fought here for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, even the great elder was alarmed. And this Jiang Haoyan is the second person to enter Turtle King Island after Feng Zihan. Do you think his strength is simple? I just don't know how long Jiang Haoyan can last in front of the madman this time. Everyone was discussing. They all wanted to enter Turtle King Island and watch the battle up close. But no one dared to take half a step forward. Haha! Awesome, awesome! In the sky above the center of the island, the madman laughed loudly as he attacked mercilessly. Qin Feiyang also went all out. The power of his physical body poured out like a torrent. However, after countless rounds of collision, neither of them had any injuries. The madman said, "It's about time to warm up." "Yes, it's time to get serious." Qin Feiyang nodded his head. Boom. The two released their divine power at the same time. The madman's divine power was blood red, as if it was condensed from blood. It dyed the world red and emitted a monstrous evil aura. Qin Feiyang used the power of fire, turning into a sea of fire that swept in all directions. This world was like a big furnace in an instant. The two divine powers carried a destructive aura as they roared in the sky and fiercely collided together. Boom. The world lost its color, and the void was annihilated. The two retreated at the same time. Qin Feiyang's face turned pale. A stream of blood rushed to his throat, but he swallowed it back down. The purple gold dragon blood must not be exposed. And the madman naturally didn't need to hide it. Wisps of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. I really didn't misjudge you. You are a powerhouse worthy of a battle. The madman wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. The boiling battle intent became even more terrifying. Thank you for the compliment. Qin Feiyang smiled. But in his eyes, there was a bright light. This battle couldn't be in a stalemate. He had to end it quickly. Otherwise, with the madman's strength, he would definitely be injured. Clang. One after another, sword shadows appeared out of nowhere. Guthuan sword technique. A total of 70 sword shadows, sharp enough to tear the world apart. Without any hesitation, Qin Feiyang waved his hand and the 70 sword shadows slashed towards the madman. Divine technique? The madman paused for a moment, then his face was filled with disdain. A mere low-grade divine technique can't hurt me. He didn't even activate his divine technique and directly took a step forward. His face was filled with confidence. Boom. Madman punched out with a powerful aura. instantly shattering a large portion of the 70 sword shadows. Actually, Qin Feiyang also knew that low-grade divine techniques couldn't pose a threat to the madman, because the madman's body was as strong as his. With the strength of their bodies, they could even crush middle-grade divine artifacts. And the grade of divine artifacts and divine techniques corresponded. Low grade against low grade. Middle grade against middle grade. High grade against high grade. Perfect grade against supreme grade. So even if someone of the same level used a middle-grade divine technique, they couldn't hurt them. Even if it was a high-grade divine technique or high-grade divine artifact, they could still fight with their bodies. Knowing that it wouldn't work but still doing this, it wasn't that Qin Feiyang was stupid, he had a purpose. Although the madman seemed simple-minded, as a battle maniac, he had more battle experience than anyone else. For people like this, as long as they entered a battle state, whether it was their perception or their senses, they would all be focused. In short, on the surface he seemed careless, but in reality, he was always on guard. So, Qin Feiyang wanted to make the madman careless and slowly underestimate him. As long as the madman was careless, he would quickly defeat him. In just a few blinks of an eye, the 70 sword shadows were all shattered. Qin Feiyang's blood boiled. Purple gold dragon blood rose to his throat several times, but he swallowed it back down. Boom. He raised his arm again, his index finger pointing in the air. An invisible force burst out. Void returning art. The current void returning art had transformed into a middle-grade divine technique. If it was in Great Qin or Forgotten Continent, a middle-grade divine technique would definitely be a treasure. But here it wasn't anything. Especially in front of the madman, he could destroy it with a wave of his hand. You don't know my body and strength. This level of divine technique is useless against me. Can you be a bit more serious? The madman said angrily. He thought that Qin Feiyang was deliberately playing with him. Qin Feiyang turned a deaf ear to him, and once again conjured the sun and moon eclipse. Still a middle-grade divine technique? The madman was furious. He leaped forward, and instantly shattered it with a punch. He stared at Qin Feiyang, and said gloomily, "If you continue like this, I will be angry." Literature Museum. Chapter 1999. I'm just afraid that you won't get angry. Qin Feiyang snickered secretly. The void returning art, Guthyuan sword art, and Eclipse Moon were once again evolved. Enough. It's really enough. The madman roared again and again, like a demon god, his black hair fluttering in the wind. He shattered the Guthyuan sword art with a punch, shattered the Eclipse Moon with a palm, and then smashed the void returning art with a head-on collision. The three great divine arts were instantly disintegrated. This kind of strength was truly terrifying. Swish. Following closely, the madman took a step forward, his entire body erupting with a shocking killing intent as he said, "Since you only have this little ability, then there's no point in keeping you alive. Now is the time." Qin Feiyang's eyes flickered as he activated the return art, directly disappearing from the madman's line of sight. And the madman was startled. Then he felt a fatal sense of danger behind him. At this moment, Qin Feiyang was standing behind the madman, a wisp of blood-red light shooting out from his fingertips. The madman's hair stood on end. Over the years he had fought with countless people, been injured, and lost his life. It could be said, he had crawled out from death. But this sense of danger was something he had never felt before. It was as if there was a death god standing behind him, waving a sickle, about to chop off his head. Even when he fought with Feng Zihan, the number one on the heaven list for 3 days and 3 nights, he did not have this kind of feeling. The blood-red light was like a flash in the pan, instantly shattering the madman's flesh and blood, heading straight for his Qi. The outcome has been decided, Qin Feiyang muttered, a smile creeping onto his face. However, at this moment, a golden light suddenly appeared on the madman's body. The blood-red light that was about to enter his Qi was actually blocked by the golden light. The smile on Qin Feiyang's face suddenly froze, his eyes filled with disbelief. Boom. Immediately after, a mighty divine might, like a volcano, rushed out from the madman's body. That wisp of blood-red light was actually shattered. Puff. The bloody light shattered. Qin Feiyang could no longer hold it in. A mouthful of blood gushed out from his throat and directly sprayed onto the madman's back. Oh no! Qin Feiyang's expression changed. The aura of dragon blood? Although the madman's back was facing Qin Feiyang, he could feel the aura of the purple-gold dragon blood the moment it appeared. He abruptly turned around and looked at Qin Feiyang. There was still a trace of purple-gold blood at the corner of Qin Feiyang's mouth. He then touched the clothes on his back and lowered his head to look at the purple-gold dragon blood in his hand. His eyes were filled with shock. Looking at the madman's expression, Qin Feiyang let out a long breath. The nervousness in his heart disappeared. It wasn't because the madman didn't recognize the purple-gold dragon blood. The reason for that was because he had already decided to kill that man. Since they were all going to die, what was there to be nervous about? This is purple-gold dragon blood. The madman's eyes trembled as he raised his head and stared at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang said indifferently, "Now you know why I admitted defeat before." The madman said, "You were afraid that if we really fought, your purple-gold dragon blood would be exposed." "Yes. Just now, I kept using low-tier and mid-tier techniques to deliberately anger you and make you careless. In the end, I succeeded. But what I didn't expect was that you actually had the ability to block my kill formula." Qin Feiyang said regretfully. "Kill formula?" The madman raised his eyebrows. Qin Feiyang said with a smile, "At this time, there is no need to ask this." Looking at the smile on Qin Feiyang's face, the madman inexplicably felt a chill in his heart. "There is indeed no need. But I want to know, who are you to Qin Batian?" The madman said solemnly. Qin Feiyang said, "If I say that I don't know him, or that my original body is a purple-gold dragon, you will definitely not believe me." "Nonsense." The madman sneered. Qin Feiyang said, "All right, I admit that Qin Batian is my ancestor." "What? Ancestor? Then why are you called Jiang Haotian?" The madman was shocked. Qin Feiyang said with a smile, "Isn't it obvious?" The madman's pupils shrank as he asked, "What is your real name?" "Qin Feiyang." Qin Feiyang said. "Qin Feiyang." The madman murmured and suddenly laughed. "I didn't expect that Qin Batian actually has a descendant. Today, if I want to leave Turtle King Island alive, I'm afraid it won't be easy." "You are indeed a smart person," Qin Feiyang said with a smile. "Haha. Then let's give it a try. Let's see if you have the ability or not." The madman took a step forward. His divine aura was vast and shook all directions. However, his cultivation base didn't change at all. It was still suppressed to the level of a war god. Qin Feiyang also took a step forward. The power of the divine dragon surged out. The divine dragon seal instantly appeared. Its terrifying divine aura shook the heavens. Since the purple-gold dragon blood had been exposed, there was naturally no need to hide anything else. The power of the divine dragon. "I'm really envious." The madman sighed. But his eyes became sharper and sharper. Boom. Accompanied by a boom, blood-colored divine power surged out like a tide. A palm-sized blood-colored square seal appeared in the sky. It was surging with blood energy and a murderous aura. "Let's see if your divine dragon seal is stronger, or my blood demon seal is stronger." As the madman's voice fell, the blood-colored square seal expanded in the wind. In an instant, it was like a mountain, carrying an unparalleled destructive power as it blasted towards the divine dragon seal. This aura, Qin Feiyang's eyes trembled slightly. The so-called blood demon seal's aura was actually stronger than the divine dragon seal. Could it be a peak-level divine technique? Not daring to be careless, the power of the divine dragon surged. The divine dragon seal also quickly expanded to thousands of feet. It was no different from the blood demon seal. In a trance, there seemed to be a dragon roar that shook the sky. The two square seals collided and shattered in the void at the same time. Blood light and purple gold divine light illuminated half the sky. Puff! And at the same time, the two retreated several feet. Blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. "It's indeed a peak-level divine technique," Qin Feiyang muttered. Although the divine dragon seal and the blood demon seal appeared to be equally matched, It should be known that Qin Feiyang's divine dragon seal was innately stronger than other divine powers. A divine technique evolved from the divine dragon power was naturally stronger than other perfect divine techniques. In other words, if the Blood Devil seal was a perfect deity formula, then the divine dragon seal should have had the upper hand and not the current situation where both jade and common stone were destroyed. The power of the purple gold divine dragon is indeed worthy of its reputation. Frenzy's fighting spirit rose. Roar of the blood demon. With a roar, blood-colored divine power soared into the sky. A figure shrouded in blood mist appeared in the sky. Roar. That figure was tens of thousands of feet tall. It stepped on the void and had a blood-red crown on its head. It was also wearing blood-red armor. That monstrous evil aura surged in all directions. From afar, it really looked like a terrifying blood demon had returned. The Blood Devil raised his head and roared. A blood-colored wave rolled out and pounced towards Qin Feiyang from all directions. Qin Feiyang's eyes widened. That blood-colored wave was not formed by divine power, but a sound wave. A terrifying aura that could destroy heaven and earth. It made one tremble in fear. He was more and more surprised by the strength displayed by Frenzy. He did not dare to be careless. With a wave of his hand, the purple gold divine dragon appeared out of thin air and let out a deafening dragon roar. Waves after waves of formless sound waves blasted out in a mighty manner. Boom. The two sound waves crazily collided in the sky. The void within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles shattered. The island below was even more fragmented and in a complete mess. In the end, the two divine techniques ended in a draw. Unbelievable. A mere perfect battle technique can actually be on par with a peak divine technique. This is the power of the purple gold divine dragon? Frenzy murmured as his body trembled. This was not fear. It was excitement. The blood in his body was boiling. This was the opponent he wanted. What identity the other party had was not important to him at all. As long as he could fight with him happily, it was fine. As expected of a battle maniac. Qin Feiyang shook his head. To be honest, he admired this person. But there was no other way. Even if he admired him, he had to kill him. Who told this person to know something that he should not know? Clang. Boom. With a thought, the emperor statue appeared in the sky. The mighty emperor aura instantly shrouded all directions. Qin Batian. Frenzy looked at the emperor statue with bright eyes. Qin Feiyang was taken aback and hurriedly said, "You've seen my ancestor? If you win, I'll tell you." Frenzy laughed. Blood-colored divine power roared, and the blood demon from before appeared again. But there was a halberd in the blood demon's hand. That halberd was also like blood, surging with a murderous aura. Why do I feel that this person's divine technique is similar to the divine dragon technique and the fire phoenix technique? Qin Feiyang frowned. The first blood-colored square seal, then the roar of the blood demon, and now this move. They all had the same effect as the divine dragon technique and the fire phoenix technique. Before he could think about it, the blood demon had already charged over. With every step he took, heaven and earth trembled. He was like a peerless demon king with a shocking aura. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed coldly. The emperor statue also took a step forward. The broken sword exuded an apocalyptic aura as it slashed over. Clang. The broken sword and halberd met in the void, creating an earth-shattering sound. At the same time, the dazzling flames were like fireworks in the sky. The emperor statue against the blood demon. The broken sword against the halberd. This was a marvelous battle. The two colossal figures continued to clash and collide, causing the sky to darken and the earth to dim. Let's not be idle. Qin Feiyang retracted his gaze and waved his hand. Killing intent immediately erupted. A blood-colored light streaked across the sky like lightning and swept towards Frenzy's chi. Yes, yes, yes. That's the way it should be. Frenzy laughed. The golden light in his body surged again, and blasted towards the blood-colored light. Boom. The blood-colored light was blocked again. And after a moment of stalemate, the light shattered. What the hell is this? Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. Although the blood-colored light was only formed by a wisp of killing intent, and didn't even have a third of the power of the kill character art, it could even seriously injure a half-step divine lord. And according to his estimation, the power of this wisp of killing intent was comparable to a legendary divine technique. But this frenzy actually shattered the killing intent twice. Wait, could it be that he still has a legendary divine technique? Chapter 2000. Just as Qin Feiyang was bewildered, Madman's body was covered in bloodlight and gradually formed a set of blood armor on his body. An even more terrifying murderous aura was emitted from his body. Qin Feiyang was startled and quickly recovered. When he saw Madman at this moment, he was furious. Don't panic, this is not a divine artifact. Although I am belligerent and disgusting, I am still a man of my word. If I say I won't use a divine artifact, then I won't use it. Madman grinned. Not a divine artifact? Qin Feiyang was surprised. Could it be the same as his battle word art, a divine art? Boom. Above. Suddenly there was a deafening noise. Both of their bodies shook and spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time. Then they looked up at the sky at the same time, and saw that the blood demon and emperor statue had been torn apart, and were dissipating. It's a draw again. Qin Feiyang frowned. Madman retracted his gaze and laughed. Come on, the real battle has only just begun. After that, he took a step towards Qin Feiyang. The blood armor on his body was covered in blood light. His hair and eyes were dyed red. He was a living blood demon. Qin Feiyang looked up at the sky with some hesitation. Don't worry. The Sky Dragon Sea is a very special place. Those old things in Nine Heaven Palace can't see the scene here. So just make your move. Madman said. I see. Qin Feiyang nodded and then smiled. As long as the big shots of Nine Heaven Palace couldn't see the scene here, then there was nothing to worry about. Boom. At this moment, a shocking battle intent roared out from his body like a volcano. A set of blood armor also appeared on his body. It was the transformation of the battle word art. Madman was stunned. Don't worry. I, Qin Feiyang, am also a man of my word. If I say I won't use a divine artifact, then I won't use it. Qin Feiyang took a step forward, his black hair fluttering in the wind. With surging battle intent, he threw a punch. Interesting. Madman laughed and punched out without dodging. Bang. The two fists collided like lightning, destroying everything in their path. Puff. The madman spat out a mouthful of blood and smashed into the ground like a cannonball. What? So strong. Madman was rather shocked. Qin Feiyang was not surprised at all. Like a god of war, he stood proudly in the void, his aura shaking the clouds. The battle symbol art was a heaven-defying divine art. Once he put on this armor, it was equivalent to activating the battle formula. As for the mad scientist's blood-red armor, according to his observation, it was only formed from a pinnacle deity art, so its defense was naturally inferior to the battle symbol art. After all, the armor formed by the battle formula could block 90% of the attack power. 90%? What kind of concept was that? In other words, after wearing this armor, Qin Feiyang would only take 10% of the damage. If the madman hadn't suppressed his cultivation, that 10% of the damage would have caused Qin Feiyang serious injuries. But it was a pity. The madman had suppressed his cultivation to the same level as him. Therefore, with the madman's current strength, it was like scratching an itch on his body. It was not worth mentioning at all. So, the madman rushed out from the ground and stood in front of Qin Feiyang. Staring at the armor on Qin Feiyang, his eyes were filled with shock. Take out all your tricks. Otherwise, you will never be able to break through the defense of this armor. Qin Feiyang said. What kind of joke is this? The madman was instantly enraged. Blood-red divine power surged out and crazily pounced at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang stood in the void motionless. Boom. The divine power quickly drowned him. But after a while, there was not a single injury on his body. The madman was dumbfounded. Blood demon seal. Blood demon roar. Following his low roar, the three divine arts instantly swept through the air, destroying everything in their path. The seal, the sound wave, and the halberd bombarded Qin Feiyang one after another. However, despite suffering such a terrifying bombardment, the armor on his body did not have a single trace of damage. And he himself was not injured at all. Even his breathing was not messed up. How is this possible? Your armor, what level of god art is it? The madman asked with a dazed expression. A mere set of armor was able to block all of his attacks. How was he going to fight? That is not important. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Haha. To be honest, I am a bit regretful now. Why did I suppress my cultivation? But then again, it is more interesting to defeat you like this. The madman laughed. Is that so? The corner of Qin Feiyang's mouth lifted as the blood-red armor dissipated. What do you mean? Are you looking down on me? The madman frowned and said angrily. It is indeed a bit interesting. Qin Feiyang nodded his head. Bastard, immediately put on that armor for me. The madman roared. If you want me to activate the armor again, let's see if you have the ability. Qin Feiyang said indifferently. Finished. He waved his hands, and the Guthyuan sword art, void returning art, eclipse moon, and other god arts appeared one by one. Fuck. Qin Feiyang, you are too much. The madman rushed towards Qin Feiyang with monstrous anger. Not only did he put away the armor, but he also evolved these low and middle-tier god arts. This was simply a humiliation to him. Qin Feiyang turned a deaf ear. With a wave of his hand, the various deity arts covered the sky as they shot toward the madman. Shatter for me. Madman rushed forward with a ferocious aura. It was a completely overwhelming suppression. But for this, Qin Feiyang did not have the slightest reaction. Divine Dragon art and Fire Phoenix art also appeared one after another. What? It's actually the Fire Phoenix art. The madman was stunned. This time Qin Feiyang could not remain calm. How did the madman know about the Fire Phoenix art? Fire Phoenix art, Lu Xingyang's self-created god art. It is almost on par with the first 3 moves of the Divine Dragon art. Are you a descendant of Qin Batian or Lu Xingyang? The madman shouted. You even know this? Qin Feiyang's heart was in a mess. This madman actually knew so much? Could it be that he also knew the whereabouts of his ancestors? No. This person could not be killed. Even if he had to kill him, he had to think of a way to control him and read his memories. You want to know? Okay, I will tell you. They are all my ancestors. Qin Feiyang said. The madman was stunned. After reacting, he pondered for a moment and asked very seriously. You are a hybrid? You are the hybrid. Your whole family is a hybrid. Qin Feiyang was instantly enraged. All the god arts rushed forward and directly sent the madman flying. The madman vomited blood. The armor on his body was also shattered. Blood flowed out from the broken armor. After all, this time he had the Divine Dragon art. The power of God force coupled with the perfect Divine Dragon art was comparable to a pinnacle god art. Bastard, I am also angry. The madman roared. Humph. Qin Feiyang coldly snorted and rushed forward like lightning. A bloody battle more terrifying than the previous one began. Gradually the god of life faded away. Both of them were covered in blood, but their aura and fighting spirit were becoming more and more terrifying. However, there was a doubt that had been lingering in their hearts. The doubt in the madman's heart was that Qin Feiyang clearly had stronger means, but why didn't he use them? Why did he keep using these god arts that could not defeat him? Qin Feiyang's suspicions were similar as well. The strength that the madman had displayed so far could only be considered average. With just this bit of strength, it was impossible for the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace to be so afraid of him. And the upper echelons of Nine Heavens Palace would not allow him to run amok in Nine Heavens Palace. Therefore there was no doubt. This madman must still be hiding some trump cards? For example, the golden light that shattered the blood-red color was a terrifying trump card. In other words, right now the madman was only testing his strength. He had not shown his true ability. Therefore what made him puzzled was, what was the madman's true method? Although both of them had not shown their true strength, the battle was incomparably intense. After all, when one's cultivation reached this level, no matter how weak they were not comparable to those false gods or combat emperors. Time quietly passed. In the sky above the island, the two figures could no longer be seen. Only the rumbling sounds of collision could be heard. echoing in all directions. An hour had passed since the battle began. The madman was still testing Qin Feiyang's strength. But Qin Feiyang had already thrown away all his doubts and was wholeheartedly immersed in the battle. There was even a smile gradually appearing on his face. It gave others the feeling that he was enjoying it. Actually, he was enjoying it, because only by enjoying the battle could he seek a breakthrough in the battle. Yes, this was his plan. Raise the level of the various god techniques. For example, Guyuan sword technique, Void End technique. These god techniques were still useful in Great Qin and Forgotten Continent. But in the ancient world they were completely useless. Although the six-word divine technique was already enough for him to establish a foothold in the ancient world, he could not rely on the six-word divine technique for everything. Therefore, it was necessary to raise the level of the various god techniques. Especially the divine dragon technique and fire phoenix technique, they had to be raised to the peak level, or even the legendary level. Rumble. The battle had already reached its climax. The various god techniques were all evolved to the extreme by Qin Feiyang. Although the madman did not know what Qin Feiyang wanted to do, his brows gradually furrowed. Because Qin Feiyang's aura was becoming more and more shocking. Moreover, it was gradually emitting a sense of oppression. This sense of oppression went straight into the heart, oppressing the soul. And this sense of oppression seemed to be growing, becoming stronger and stronger as time passed. Especially the smile on Qin Feiyang's face, which was getting brighter and brighter. This made the madman start to feel uneasy. Chirp. Suddenly, accompanied by a high-pitched phoenix cry, the fire phoenix 4 styles instantly appeared out of thin air, and the divine power it emitted gave the madman a fright. It was actually a level stronger than before. Wait, could it be that this guy? The madman's body trembled as he stared at the fire phoenix 4 styles. His eyes quickly surged with anger as he roared. So this is your goal, to use me to comprehend in battle and raise the level of the god techniques. However, Qin Feiyang did not seem to hear it, nor did he look at the madman. He even seemed to have forgotten that he was fighting with the madman. Apart from the fire phoenix technique, he also quickly evolved the divine dragon technique and other god techniques. And all of this seemed to be his instincts, and he did not deliberately evolve these god techniques. Chapter 2001. The various god arts continued to evolve. The form of the fire phoenix art finally appeared in his sea of consciousness. The form of the first move was a fiery red god seal. The form of the second move was a lifelike fire phoenix. The form of the third move, Emperor of all spirits, was a statue of Lu Xingyang holding a long spear. The form of the fourth move, Rebirth from the Ashes, was a ball of beautiful flames. The form of the 4 god arts was the same as the dragon god art, with Qin Feiyang's soul as the center, floating in his sea of consciousness. Once the form appeared, it meant that the fire phoenix art had officially stepped into the ranks of the perfect god arts. The returning ruins art and eclipse moon had also evolved into high-grade god arts. The Guyuan sword art had also evolved into a mid-grade god art. Enjoying the battle and seeking breakthroughs in the battle, as expected of the descendant of Qin Batian. The madman murmured, his eyes flickering. The blood demon 3 styles continued to evolve, and killing intent shrouded the world. 3,000 incarnations. Qin Feiyang whispered. In the void behind him, incarnations continued to appear. 10. 100. 500. In the past, he could only summon 500 incarnations. But now it was still increasing. 600. 700. 800. 900. 1,000. A total of 1,000 incarnations stood in the void behind Qin Feiyang, densely packed in a large area. Each incarnation, whether it was temperament or appearance, was exactly the same as the original body. One incarnation was the initial stage. 1,000 incarnations were the initial stage. 2,000 incarnations were the final stage. 3,000 incarnations were the perfection stage. Now that Qin Feiyang could summon 1,000 incarnations, his consciousness had officially stepped into the initial stage. Incarnations? No, they don't seem to be incarnations. The madman looked at the 1,000 incarnations, dumbfounded. Divine Dragon Seal. Divine Dragon Roar. Supreme Emperor. Suddenly, 1,000 incarnations, together with Qin Feiyang himself, shouted in unison. At that moment, purple gold divine light illuminated the world. 1,000 divine seals, 1,000 purple gold divine dragons, and 1,000 emperor statues were in the sky. The terrifying divine might and dragon might shook the sky. It can even evolve the divine dragon art. Furthermore, the aura emitted by each clone is no weaker than that of Qin Feiyang himself. What kind of divine art is this? Madman's body and mind trembled. The earth-shattering deity arts attacked his soul and gaze. Boom. All of a sudden, the divine dragon seal, divine dragon roar, and the aura of a ruler soared to an unprecedented level. This is the aura of a peak-grade deity art. The madman looked at Qin Feiyang, and his heart was in turmoil. He could also evolve the godly arts. Not only that, those on the 9 Heavens Palace's Earth ranking were capable of doing the same as well. But usually the most it could do was evolve the lower, middle, and upper grades to perfection. In other words, a perfect deity incantation was already the limit. As for raising a perfect deity art to a pinnacle deity art, in the entire Empyrean Palace, only the monstrous geniuses on the heaven ranking could do it. In other words, this person's talent was already sufficient to contend with those monstrous geniuses on the heaven roll. It was also at this moment, Qin Feiyang finally looked at the madman and smiled. Thank you for fighting with me for so long. These deity arts are my thanks to you. As his voice fell, Qin Feiyang and an incarnation waved their hands at the same time, and the sky full of deity art suddenly turned into a torrent, majestically charging towards the madman. The madman's expression changed. 1,000 incarnations, just a perfect deity art was already enough to make one's soul tremble. Not to mention that this divine dragon art was a peak-grade deity art. He definitely couldn't take it head-on. In the nick of time, shwa, the madman took a step forward, and his body rapidly expanded several times, instantly disappearing from Qin Feiyang's line of sight. And Qin Feiyang was surprised. Although the speed displayed by the madman couldn't be compared to the attainment art, it was still faster than a peak-grade support deity art. In other words, it was very likely that the madman was using a legendary support-type divine art right now. This guy really can't be underestimated. Qin Feiyang muttered. If there was a legendary support deity art, then there might also be a legendary killing deity art. However, even so, as long as the madman kept suppressing his cultivation, then there would be no suspense in this battle. Shwa. Qin Feiyang waved his hand, and the 1,000 incarnations simultaneously stepped on the attainment art, crossing the void. Without waiting for the madman to recover, they once again surrounded the madman. Damn, this speed. The madman's speed surprised Qin Feiyang, and Qin Feiyang's speed surprised the madman even more. Kill. Qin Feiyang shouted. The 1,000 incarnations killing intent immediately soared into the sky. Divine Dragon Seal, Divine Dragon Roar, Divine Dragon Roar, shook the sky, destroying all directions. So many peak-grade deity arts, I'm afraid even if I use all my means, I still won't be able to block them. Unless I no longer suppress my cultivation. The madman looked around, his eyes flashing. But if he went back on his words, he would lose face. The most important thing was, once he let go of his cultivation, it was equivalent to admitting defeat. What should he do? Boom. Suddenly, a powerful aura rolled over from the distance. The madman was startled. He looked into the distance and hurriedly said to Qin Feiyang, quickly put away the divine dragon art and go hide. Qin Feiyang also sensed the aura. It was extremely terrifying, far surpassing the war god. Qin Feiyang immediately raised his eyebrows. Didn't you say that without your permission, no one dares to step onto Turtle King Island? The madman's expression was awkward. That woman is an exception. You should quickly retreat, otherwise if she sees the purple gold dragon blood, you won't be able to survive even if you have 10 lives. Qin Feiyang's eyes were gloomy. The madman said, don't worry, I will help you keep your identity a secret. Qin Feiyang looked deeply at the madman before dispersing his incarnation and entering the black tortoise world. The deity arts that filled the sky also dissipated. I used to be annoyed by that woman. But this time, I really have to thank her. She came at the right time, otherwise it would have been embarrassing. The madman chuckled, and with a wave of his hand, his divine power surged to the ground below. The purple-gold dragon blood on the ground was instantly annihilated. The remaining dragon aura in the void was also quickly erased. Soon, a woman in a light purple dress broke through the air. She was tall, her skin was white, her hair fluttered in the wind, and her facial features were exquisite. She could be said to be a peerless beauty. However, her entire body emitted an ice-cold aura. Her face was also extremely cold, as if she was an ice fairy that kept everyone 1,000 miles away. Feng Zihan, what are you doing here? Didn't I say that Turtle King Island is my territory and no one is allowed to enter? The madman looked at the woman with dissatisfaction. However, Feng Zihan directly ignored him and looked around, asking, "Where's Jiang Haotian?" "What Jiang Haotian?" The madman was suspicious. "Don't play dumb. I received news earlier that you brought Jiang Haotian into Turtle King Island. Not long ago, when I came to Turtle King Island, I heard from the disciples gathered outside that you and Jiang Haotian had already started fighting. And at that time, I did feel the fluctuations of a battle." Feng Zihan looked at him coldly. "You really talk too much." A trace of hostility flashed across the madman's face as he laughed dryly. "Jiang Haotian was already defeated by me and ran away with his tail between his legs." "Is that so? Then why didn't I see him on the way here?" Feng Zihan said. "I say, what do you mean? Am I your prisoner?" Such an interrogative tone. "Also, what does my sparring with Jiang Haotian have to do with you? Why are you so nosy?" the madman said impatiently. Feng Zihan's eyes were filled with anger, but he quickly suppressed it and said, "I just came to see what kind of person is qualified for you to invite into Turtle King Island. Whether others are qualified or not is up to me, not you. If there's nothing else, then leave. Don't bother me." The madman waved his hand as if he didn't like this woman. "You." Feng Zihan clenched her fists as anger rose on her face. After a moment, she took a deep breath and said, "I'll leave, but before I leave, I have a question." "Speak," the madman said. "Previously, I sensed a dragon's aura here, but when I came here, I didn't see any divine dragons. The dragon's aura seems to have been deliberately erased by you. What's going on?" Feng Zihan said coldly. "I already said that this has nothing to do with you, so why are you asking? Do you want to fight with me? Then come, don't dawdle," the madman said angrily as he rolled up his sleeves, looking aggressive. "Bastard." Feng Zihan was so angry that her body was trembling. She glared at the madman before turning around and leaving angrily. The madman smiled disdainfully, and even raised his middle finger at Feng Zihan's back. Black Tortoise World. Qin Feiyang looked at the madman and Feng Zihan, his eyebrows tightly knitted together. What did the madman mean? He actually helped him keep it a secret. Also, the relationship between the two seemed to be somewhat thought-provoking. The anger that Feng Zihan showed towards the madman before was not the anger of an ordinary person towards an ordinary person. Instead, she seemed to be a little wronged. After Feng Zihan left, Qin Feiyang found a pool in the Devil's Land and washed the bloodstains on his body before changing into a clean set of clothes. This set of clothes was taken from Cheng Li and had a flame pattern on it. And in the universe bag, other than a pile of clothes, there were 10 soul stones. This was the monthly salary of an outer sect disciple. It's really pitifully little. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Compared to Feng Zihan's 1 million soul stones per month, it was really a drop in the bucket. Shua. With a flash, he appeared beside the madman. Looking at the incomparably clean Qin Feiyang, the madman teased, "Your movements are quite nimble." Qin Feiyang teased, "Let's not talk nonsense. What is your relationship with Feng Zihan?" "What do you mean by that? What relationship can I have with her?" The madman frowned. Qin Feiyang suspiciously said, "But why do I feel like she was jealous just now?" "Jealous? I think she took the wrong medicine." The madman pursed his lips. Took the wrong medicine? The corner of Qin Feiyang's mouth twitched. It seemed that this person was also a blockhead. Previously, Feng Zihan was clearly displeased because Madman brought him to Turtle King Island. If this wasn't jealousy, then what was? Maybe this Feng Zihan still liked the Madman. However, the Madman was a battle maniac and probably didn't notice this. Chapter 2002. Madman glanced at Qin Feiyang and said, "Let's end today's sparring here, let's go back." "And here?" Qin Feiyang was taken aback. He grabbed Madman and said, "This won't do." "Why not? Today we've met our match. It's a draw." Madman said. "Evenly matched? Doesn't your conscience hurt when you say that?" Qin Feiyang said angrily. 3,000 incarnations, evolved to the small success stage. When Feng Zihan finally came, he clearly noticed that Madman was at a loss. But now, he actually had the audacity to say that they were evenly matched and the victor could not be determined? Wasn't this clearly trying to act shamelessly? Hearing Qin Feiyang's words, Madman's expression was quite awkward. This time, he was really careless. Why did he suppress his cultivation? Otherwise, he wouldn't have been caught by this person. Suddenly, his eyes turned and he secretly laughed. "If you don't want your identity to be exposed, I can fight with you again." "Identity exposed? What do you mean?" Qin Feiyang was surprised. "I know that woman Feng Zihan very well. She definitely hasn't really left. She should be hiding somewhere and monitoring us," Madman said. Qin Feiyang was shocked and quickly released his divine sense. "It's useless. Feng Zihan's spatial divine item is embedded with the hidden soul stone," Madman said indifferently. Qin Feiyang's eyes flickered. He didn't know if Madman was telling the truth or not. "You don't believe me? Okay, I'll call her out." Madman laughed mockingly. Looking at the surrounding void, he said angrily, "Damn woman, where are you hiding?" Shua. A woman in a light purple dress suddenly appeared in the void not far away. "She's really here." Qin Feiyang's heart trembled. Madman stared at Feng Zihan and coldly snorted. "I knew you wouldn't leave so easily." Feng Zihan coldly glanced at the Madman before looking at Qin Feiyang. That cold gaze caused Qin Feiyang to feel a chill in his heart. Qin Feiyang cupped his hands and smiled. "So it's senior sister Feng Zihan. It's an honor to meet you at last." Feng Zihan said, "I heard you say that Frenzy lost to you." This? Qin Feiyang didn't know how to answer. "Bitch, you're humiliating me, do you know that? I am Nine Heavens Palace's fiercest. How could I lose to a rookie who just entered Nine Heavens Palace, and is even an outer disciple?" Madman said angrily. "Shut up." Feng Zihan glared at the Madman. He looked at Qin Feiyang and said, "Jiang Haotian, I have long heard of your great name. Why don't we spar and see if you have the qualifications to step onto Turtle King Island?" Ugh. Qin Feiyang was stunned. The first few words were just pleasantries. The last sentence was the main point. Did he have the qualifications to step onto Turtle King Island? If this wasn't jealousy, then what was? It seemed that this woman really liked the Madman. It was a pity that the Madman, who was a battle maniac, couldn't understand. Feng Zihan's gaze was aggressive. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled. A senior brother, Madman said, "I'm just an outer disciple. How would I dare to spar with senior sister Feng, who is #1 on the heaven leaderboard? Don't be so modest. I'll also suppress my cultivation to the level of war god like Madman." After Feng Zihan finished speaking, she really suppressed her cultivation. And without any explanation, divine power surged out as she took a step towards Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang's eyes darkened. Was this woman jealous, or did she want to take the opportunity to help Feng Zihan kill him? Shua. But suddenly, Madman took a step in front of Qin Feiyang and said angrily, "You stinking bitch, you're not done yet, are you?" "What did you say?" Feng Zihan froze and stared angrily at Madman. "Lousy said you're a stinking bitch," Madman said. "Bastard, I'm not done with you." Feng Zihan was enraged and turned to slap Madman. Madman saw that the situation wasn't good. He grabbed Qin Feiyang and flew away like lightning. "Stop!" Feng Zihan shouted angrily and followed closely. "Really troublesome. Brother Qin, let me tell you, in Nine Heaven Palace, Lousy isn't afraid of anyone, but I'm afraid of this woman." Madman was secretly annoyed. Why? Qin Feiyang was puzzled. This woman likes Laozi, but Laozi doesn't have any feelings for her. Actually, it's all Laozi's fault. I shouldn't have fought with her back then. Madman's face was filled with regret. Fighting with her and her liking you, this doesn't seem to have anything to do with it, right? Qin Feiyang was even more puzzled. Who said it's not related? That's when she started to like me. At that time, we fought on this island for 3 days and 3 nights. We were almost exhausted. Just as the victor was about to be decided, a sea beast suddenly barged in. And it was extremely strong. If it was at its peak, whether it was me or her, we could easily deal with it. But at that time, we didn't have much strength left. Seeing the sea beast charge at her first, I stepped forward to protect her. Don't misunderstand. I really don't have anything to do with her. It was completely out of a man's instinct. Madman thought. I won't misunderstand. But obviously, this woman misunderstood. She thought that you protected her because you liked her. Qin Feiyang snickered. Isn't that the case? Later on, she came to find me every few days. It gave me a headache. Madman rubbed his forehead in annoyance. Qin Feiyang glanced at Feng Zihan behind him and snickered. I thought you didn't know that she likes you. Laozi isn't blind. Madman glared at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang shook his head in amusement and thought. Let's not talk about Feng Zihan for now. In short, thank you for helping me keep it a secret. But you have to do what you promised me. After all, you have to keep your word. Wait. What did I promise you? Madman raised his eyebrows. Qin Feiyang suppressed his anger and said, You said that if you lost, you would help me do something unconditionally. Also, tell me about the situation between my ancestor and Lu Xingyang. Did I say that? No, I don't remember. Madman shook his head and laughed. Are you really going to go back on your word? Do you believe that I won't spread the news that you lost to me? Veins popped out on Qin Feiyang's forehead. Madman said indifferently, But you have to admit that we didn't win. Moreover, I have something on you, so you can't threaten me. Alright. Let's get rid of Feng Zihan and change places. Then we'll fight again. Qin Feiyang gritted his teeth. Forget it, after being disturbed by that woman, I've already lost interest. Let's wait for the next time. Madman shook his head. Qin Feiyang was incomparably annoyed. His eyes turned and he suddenly sneered. I really didn't expect that you would be such a person. What kind of person am I? If you don't make it clear today, I won't let you off. Madman's tail was suddenly stepped on as he said angrily. Qin Feiyang sneered. Touch your conscience and tell me, if you don't release the suppression on your cultivation, can you beat me? Madman raised his eyebrows. Finally, he glared at Qin Feiyang angrily and said, Fine, I admit defeat. I promise you, I will help you do one thing. That's more like it. If you want to spar in the future, feel free to find me. Qin Feiyang secretly laughed. Don't. I can't afford to provoke trouble like you. Madman hurriedly said. I'm trouble like that? What do you mean? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. What I mean is, if I had known that you were the descendant of Qin Batian, I would never have asked you to spar. I'm just looking for trouble. Madman shook his head and sighed, his face full of regret. It was as if in his eyes, Qin Feiyang was a god of plague. What the hell is going on? Qin Feiyang frowned. Madman's words had a hidden meaning. Madman glanced at Feng Zihan behind him and said, Let me tell you this, if your identity is exposed, you will be finished on the spot. The entire North region will not tolerate you. Qin Feiyang's heart trembled. Could it be that his worries were true? His ancestor and 9 Heaven Palace had really turned against each other? It's not convenient for me to say the details. You can investigate it yourself. In the future, try not to find me. I don't want to be implicated by you. No. I have to move out of my current cave and take the initiative to keep a distance from you. Madman thought. The corner of Qin Feiyang's mouth twitched. Move out of the cave? Was there a need to be so exaggerated? A moment later, the two left Turtle King Island. Feng Zihan followed closely behind. Outside the island, there were no less than 300 to 400 people gathered. Madman glanced at those people and said angrily, "Who spread the news of me and Jiang Haoyan sparring here?" Hearing this, everyone immediately dispersed. But there were 4 people who didn't leave. They were 4 black-clothed men. They stood in the void and ignored Madman, only looking at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang looked at the 4, and found that there were no flame patterns on their bodies. They were obviously not from Nine Heaven Palace. Moreover, the aura they exuded surpassed War God. "Who is it?" Madman looked at the 4 suspiciously. Feng Zihan flew over, and was also puzzled. One of the men with a scar on his face looked at Qin Feiyang and asked, "You are Jiang Haoyan?" "Yes." Qin Feiyang nodded. A cold light flashed in the eyes of the 4. The scarred man cupped his hands and said, "We are the guards of Star River City, Lord. Please follow us to Star River City, young Master Jiang." His tone and attitude were very polite. But when he heard the word Star River City, Qin Feiyang knew what these 4 wanted to do. "Not free," Qin Feiyang said indifferently. "Star River City, Lord." At the same time, in the void behind, a light flashed in Feng Zihan's eyes. When the scarred man heard Qin Feiyang's words, he couldn't help but feel angry. He said with a fake smile, "Young Master Jiang, we are just following orders. Please don't make things difficult for us." Qin Feiyang's eyes also gradually became gloomy. Madman suddenly took a step forward and grinned at the 4 people. Hey, may I ask, what is this Star River City Lord thing? You dare to come to our Nine Heaven Palace and ask for someone?" Qin Feiyang was a little surprised. Didn't he say before that he wanted to keep a distance from him? Why did he take the initiative to help him now? When the 4 people saw Madman stand out, their pupils shrank. They obviously knew Madman's name. Chapter 2003. Sir, this is a private matter between us and Jiang Haoyan. Please don't interfere. Moreover, we are in the Sky Dragon Sea and not Nine Heaven Palace. The scarred man looked at Madman and tried to maintain a pleasant tone. There is nothing wrong with what you said. The Sky Dragon Sea is indeed not under the jurisdiction of Nine Heaven Palace. However, Jiang Haoyan is now a disciple of our Nine Heaven Palace. You coming to capture him is equivalent to going against our Nine Heaven Palace. Madman grinned and did not give the other party any face. Sir, this is a bit too much. We have been politely inviting him to Star River City. When did we say we wanted to capture him? The scarred man frowned. I'm too lazy to talk nonsense with you. Jiang Haoyan was brought out by me. I naturally have to bring him back alive. If you have nothing to do, then get lost. Don't block my way. Madman shouted. The 4's eyes trembled and unwillingly retreated to the side. Let's go. Madman smiled proudly and swaggered past the 4 of them. Qin Feiyang glanced at the 4 and chased after Madman. But just as Qin Feiyang passed by the 4, the scarred man's eyes flashed, and he sent a palm toward Qin Feiyang. The other 3 were also filled with killing intent. Qin Feiyang had been paying attention to the 4. The moment the 4 attacked, he immediately activated the walkward art and retreated far away. This speed. Seeing this, Feng Zihan's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. At the same time, Madman was also taken aback. He turned around and stared at the 4 with hostility. 4 early-stage divine lords dare to be presumptuous in front of me. Courting death. Boom. Before his voice faded, Madman's aura was fully released and a terrifying blood wave rolled toward the 4. No. The scarred man and the other 3 had a change of expression. But it was too late. The blood wave drowned them. The 4 screamed as their divine bodies were torn apart in the void. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. This. Qin Feiyang was dumbfounded by what he saw. 4 early-stage divine lords were killed in an instant. This is Madman's true strength? Terrifying. It was too terrifying. If the madman hadn't suppressed his cultivation, he would have had to activate his slaughter domain to have a chance. How is it? Are you scared, silly? Madman looked at Qin Feiyang proudly. Qin Feiyang swallowed his saliva and stepped forward with a frown. Aren't these people a little too arrogant? They clearly know that I am a disciple of Nine Heaven's Palace, yet they still dare to attack me? What's wrong with that? As long as it's not within the Nine Heavens Palace, those old bastards above us won't care. Moreover, you're only an outer court disciple. Who would make such a big fuss for you? Madman looked at Qin Feiyang with a face full of ridicule. Qin Feiyang smiled helplessly and cupped his hands. Thank you. Madman waved his hand. Speaking of which, with your strength, shouldn't you stay in the inner sect? Why do you want to stay in the outer sect? Could it be that it's really as the rumors say, that you were expelled to the outer court because you were too mischievous? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. Expelled to the outer court? What a joke. If I'm not willing, do they have the ability to do so? I can kill my way into the inner sect in minutes. I can only say that it's lonely at the top. Madman shook his head and sighed. Show off. Qin Feiyang's eyes were filled with disdain. He had never seen someone who could show off so much. Madman smiled and glanced at Feng Zihan. Actually, it's related to this woman. Huh. Qin Feiyang was stunned. Didn't I just say that this woman would come to find me every few days? I had a headache, so I hid in the outer court. Madman sighed. Qin Feiyang was stunned. So this is the reason why you're in the outer court? Yes. This woman, although she likes me, she cares about her face. She can't put it down and follow me to the outer court. So I just want to hide in peace. Madman said helplessly. So that's the case. Qin Feiyang suddenly understood. To be able to make Madman afraid to this extent. How difficult was this woman Feng Zihan? Feng Zihan glanced at the four dead men, before looking up at Madman. He asked, Madman, did you and Jiang Haotian know each other before? No. Madman shook his head. Then why are you helping him? Feng Zihan raised his brows. Can't I have fate with him? Madman snorted and swept up Qin Feiyang, and left without looking back. Saying that you have fate with a man, don't you feel disgusted? Feng Zihan said angrily. It's none of your business. I like men. Madman roared. Bastard, bastard. Feng Zihan stamped his foot in anger. Divine items shot out in all directions like a waterfall, causing the sea to churn for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Countless sea beasts were affected and cried out miserably. What a terrifying woman. Qin Feiyang mumbled. Once she was angry, the sea would shake. If she was provoked, wouldn't she pierce through the sky? However, Madman's words made him more concerned. Like men? He turned his head to look at Madman, and goosebumps appeared all over his body. What's with that look? Madman rolled his eyes at Qin Feiyang and transmitted his voice. I have heard about the grudge between you and Feng Zijuan. Feng Yuan and Feng Wenhai aren't simple characters. You have to be careful. Qin Feiyang sighed. They have already begun to deal with me. So fast. Madman was surprised. Qin Feiyang said, Do you know why the city lord of Star River City sent people to find me? Is it related to Feng Yuan and Feng Wenhai? Madman asked. The city lord has a son called Nie Yun. This person was bribed by Feng Yuan, and wanted to get rid of me during the assessment. But in the end I killed him instead. There's also the matter of slandering Nine Heavens Palace. I believe you should have received the news. This was also arranged by Feng Yuan. Qin Feiyang thought. I didn't expect him to act so fast. Looks like my decision was correct. I can't afford to offend Feng Zihan's family. Not only will I have to avoid them, I will have to stay away from them. Madman snickered. Avoid? But why do I feel like you don't care at all? Can you not always exaggerate? Qin Feiyang was speechless. Madman chuckled. Under Madman's full speed, the two soon left the Sky Dragon Sea. Wang Qin Feiyang's image crystal also sounded. I'll leave you to it. Madman said as he directly opened an altar and flew up. Qin Feiyang took out the image crystal. After pondering for a moment, he looked up at Madman and said, Can I trust you? You have no choice. Because you can't beat me and you can't kill me. You can only choose to trust me. The madman smiled playfully and his figure quickly dissipated. Sigh. Qin Feiyang sighed. Feng Zihan flew out of the Sky Dragon Sea and looked at Qin Feiyang. Jiang Haotian, what was the result of your fight with Madman? Qin Feiyang smiled. Senior sister, You should ask senior brother Madman personally. Feng Zihan said angrily. If he will tell me, will I put down my face to ask you? Senior sister, it's just a spar. Is there a need to be so concerned? Or does senior sister have other intentions? Qin Feiyang said. Feng Zihan's gaze instantly changed. It was as cold as ice, causing the entire area to turn cold. But Qin Feiyang didn't have any fear and looked straight at Feng Zihan's eyes. And the image crystal in his hand also stopped trembling. After a long time, Feng Zihan opened an altar and stepped on it without looking back, saying coldly, "You're on your own. I should be the one saying this to your Feng family," Qin Feiyang said with a faint smile. Feng Zihan suddenly turned around, and two cold lights burst out of her eyes. Qin Feiyang's expression was calm as he cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Senior sister, take care, I won't send you off." As his voice fell, Feng Zihan disappeared from the altar. Qin Feiyang sighed. Although he had just met Feng Zihan, it was not difficult to see that whether it was her brain or strength, she was much stronger than Feng Zijuan and Gong Zifeng. Even her father, Feng Wenhai, might not be comparable. She was definitely a difficult character to deal with. This Feng family is really a big trouble. Qin Feiyang shook his head and sighed. Entering the black tortoise world. Wang. Not long later, the image crystal buzzed and trembled again. Qin Feiyang's divine power surged and awakened the image crystal. Two phantoms suddenly appeared. It was Zhao Tailai and Tang Hai. "Young master, what are you doing? We've been sending you messages but you didn't respond," Zhao Tailai said unhappily. Qin Feiyang said, "I was in the Sky Dragon Sea before, so I couldn't receive any messages. What's the matter? Why are you in such a hurry?" Zhao Tailai said in a deep voice, "It's not just a matter, it's a matter of life and death." Qin Feiyang's eyes darkened, and he said, "Tell me. Here's what happened. Didn't we go to find Shangguan Qiu as you asked? But she recognized us at a glance. We're your subordinates," Zhao Tailai said. "What? How is that possible?" Qin Feiyang's face was blank. Tang Hai said, "What old Zhao said is true. We didn't even have a chance to speak before we were directly kicked out. Shangguan Qiu also threatened that we're not allowed to enter the treasure pavilion again. How dare she? Even if you're my people, she shouldn't have kicked you out." Qin Feiyang was quite angry. "That's not the point. The point is, how did she know our identity? You know, we've never shown our faces in the ancient world," Tang Hai said. "There's something fishy about this." Qin Feiyang thought for a while, and his eyes trembled slightly, and he said, "Could it be them?" "Who?" The two of them were surprised. "Mu Tianyang, Mu Qing. Now only the two of them know of your existence in Sky Dragon City." "Wait." Shangguan Qiu suddenly blocked me, and he didn't say a word about the Juku Yellow Dragon Pill. "And he knows you. This matter." Qin Feiyang frowned, and suddenly understood, and his eyes shone with a fierce light, and he said, "Mu Tianyang and Mu Qing are behind this." Tang Hai said, "You mean, Shangguan Qiu has already reached an agreement with Mu Tianyang?" "Yes. Disguise yourselves and go to the treasure pavilion. I think the treasure pavilion will auction the Juku Yellow Dragon Pill in the next 2 days. Think of a way to get the alchemy fire and cauldron no matter what. Also, I want to know all the details about the city lord of Xinghe City," Qin Feiyang said in a low voice. "Yes." The two of them responded respectfully, and the shadows quickly disappeared. "Mu Tianyang, you're good, stealing my business. Let's see who will have the last laugh." Qin Feiyang sneered, and left the Black Tortoise world, and opened an altar to return to the Ninth Heaven Palace. Chapter 2004. Nine Heaven Palace. Cave Mansion number 1000. Qin Dage, didn't you say that you would be back very late? Fire Lotus looked at Qin Feiyang, who hurriedly entered the cave mansion, and asked in confusion. Qin Feiyang smiled. Something happened. Then what were you busy with? Fire Lotus was suspicious. Nothing. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Still hiding it from me. I already heard that you and Madman were sparring on an island. Fire Lotus rolled her eyes at him. Heard? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Right now, The entire Nine Heavens Palace is abuzz with the news. Everyone is curious as to who won and who lost. Fire Lotus said. Qin Feiyang's mouth twitched. This was too fast. How was it? Fire Lotus's eyes were filled with curiosity. Qin Feiyang said. Madman is very strong. If he hadn't suppressed his cultivation, I definitely wouldn't have been able to beat him. So, you're saying that you won? Fire Lotus said. It's not really my win, because he has been testing my strength and didn't use his true means. If it wasn't for Feng Zihan coming to disturb the situation, we would probably still be fighting, Qin Feiyang said. Feng Zihan? Fire Lotus was stunned and said in surprise, that big sister of Gongzi's. Yes. This woman's strength can't be underestimated. Qin Feiyang sighed. Then did she do anything to you? Fire Lotus looked at Qin Feiyang with concern. She didn't. Although the battle with Madman this time didn't end well, I still gained a lot. Qin Feiyang smiled. What gains? Fire Lotus was curious. You'll be scared to death if I tell you. Guthyuan sword technique, I've already upgraded it to a mid-tier god technique. The Ruins of End incantation, Eclipse Moon, has also been upgraded to a high-tier divine incantation. The 3,000 incarnations have also entered the initial stage. But all of this is nothing. The most important ones are still the Fire Phoenix technique and the Divine Dragon technique. The Fire Phoenix technique has been upgraded to a perfect deity technique. The Divine Dragon art has evolved to a pinnacle deity art. Qin Feiyang said with a smile. Even he couldn't help but feel excited. Huo Lian was also stunned when she heard this. All the major deity arts had been upgraded. Didn't this mean that Qin Feiyang's current strength was several times stronger than before? What a scary guy. Qin Feiyang sighed. However, my identity has also been exposed. What? Exposed? Who knows? Fire Lotus exclaimed. Only lunatics. However, what I don't understand is that he actually helped me keep it a secret. Qin Feiyang frowned. Regarding this matter, he could not understand it no matter how much he thought about it. Keep it a secret, Fire Lotus muttered. Her eyes suddenly trembled, and said in shock. He couldn't be lying to you, right? Lying to me? Qin Feiyang was startled. He said that he would help you keep it a secret, probably to make you careless, and then secretly inform the upper echelons of the Nine Heavens Palace, and then kill you off. Fire Lotus said in a deep voice. Could it be like this? Qin Feiyang frowned. Although he had just come into contact with the lunatic, it was not difficult to tell from his personality that he was not such a sinister person. However, one had to be wary of others, so it was better to be careful. Otherwise, when the time came, he would really be caught off guard, and there would be nothing he could do. Stinking woman, what are you doing? Suddenly, an angry shout came from outside. The voice of a lunatic? Fire Lotus was startled and frowned. Who is he angry at this time? Stinking woman. I think only Feng Zihan can call me that. Qin Feiyang thought. Feng Zihan? What did she come to our Sword Peak for? Fire Lotus was surprised. Let's go. Let's go out and take a look. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed, and he turned and walked outside. Fire Lotus also hurriedly followed. When the two of them walked out of the cave, the people from the other caves such as Gao Xiaowei, Ma Guang, and the others, had already run out. Everyone looked at the first cave abode above. Qin Feiyang and Fire Lotus also looked up, and saw a woman in a light purple dress standing opposite the lunatic in front of the first cave abode. The two of them, one was as cold as ice, the other had a face full of anger. Who is she? Her aura is so strong. Someone muttered. Seeing that Feng Zihan did not speak for a long time, the lunatic became even angrier, and shouted, I'm asking you, what are you doing here? Feng Zihan said indifferently. What do I want to do? There's no need to report to you. The lunatic was so angry that his face turned red. Fire Lotus said in a daze. Qin Dage, what's going on? I don't know. Qin Feiyang shook his head. At this moment, Feng Zihan turned and lowered his head to look at Qin Feiyang and the others. So beautiful. When they saw Feng Zihan's appearance, the hearts of the men present could not help but tremble. Feng Zihan said, From today onwards, I will live in this sword peak, and I hope that everyone will take care of me in the future. What? She wants to move here. Qin Feiyang and Fire Lotus looked at each other. The lunatic was also stunned, and when he came back to his senses he immediately said, I don't agree. This sword peak is not yours. What right do you have to disagree? Feng Zihan said coldly, and directly turned and walked into the second cave abode. Seeing this, Ma Guang hurriedly said, Wait that. Senior sister, the second cave abode is mine. But before his voice faded, accompanied by a gust of wind, a pile of daily necessities flew out from the second cave abode and landed in front of Ma Guang in a mess. Just like that, I took it all. Ma Guang looked at the things on the ground, and then looked at the second cave abode, his face full of astonishment. Qin Feiyang stepped forward and patted Ma Guang on the shoulder, and said with a smile, Brother Ma, this is your honor. Honor? Ma Guang was taken aback, and turned to look at Qin Feiyang saying, Brother Jiang, in any case we are now friends, how can you make fun of me? Brother Jiang did not make fun of you. At this time, a hearty laugh sounded. Hui shook his head and leisurely walked out of the cave abode. Ma Guang glanced at Hui, and then looked at Qin Feiyang frowning. Two brothers, what is the meaning of this? The other disciples, including Gao Xiaowei, also looked at Qin Feiyang and Hui suspiciously. Hui smiled mysteriously. Brother Ma, do you know her identity? Identity? Ma Guang was taken aback and shook his head. Her name is Feng Zihan, the number 1 on the heaven list. Do you know what it means to be number 1 on the heaven list? It means that she is the strongest among all the disciples of 9 Heavens Palace. Even some elders are not as good as her. Now tell me again, isn't it your honor to be number 1 on the heaven list living in the cave abode you lived in? Hui laughed. Number 1 on the heaven list. She is Feng Zihan. Ma Guang was dumbfounded. The rest of the people were also shocked to the extreme. Wait. Brother Hui, Brother Jiang, she is number 1 on the heaven list. Why did she come to our outer sect? Ma Guang looked at the two and asked. I don't know about this. Maybe she is tired of the inner sect life and wants to come to our outer sect to experience life. Hui shook his head. Experience life? Ma Guang and the others were speechless to the extreme. These big shots were really bored out of their minds. Madmen glanced at the group of people and stared at Qin Feiyang and said, Qin Feiyang, no one knows about me and Feng Zihan. Don't talk nonsense behind our backs. Don't worry. I will definitely keep my mouth shut. Qin Feiyang laughed secretly. In fact, he knew that Feng Zihan coming here must have something to do with Madman. Of course, it might also have something to do with him. Really troublesome. Madman sighed and turned to enter the cave abode. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed and he said, Madman, wait. What? Madman didn't look back. Qin Feiyang asked secretly, Where does the Vice Palace Master live? Vice Palace Master? Madman was slightly taken aback and said secretly, Why are you asking about this? I want to check the history books of 9 Heavens Palace. Qin Feiyang replied. Check the information of Qin Batian? Madman was secretly playing tricks. Qin Feiyang said helplessly. Haven't you heard of the saying, see through but don't say it? Don't ask me this kind of thing, I won't tell you. Of course you can ask others, and I won't ask what you want to do. In short, don't look for me if there's nothing. All of you are troublesome. Madman snorted secretly and entered the cave abode, and the stone door closed. Looking at the closed stone door, Qin Feiyang couldn't help but smile bitterly. The number 1 on the heaven list came to our sword peak? What the hell is this? All of them are really bored. The group of disciples shook their heads and sighed, and dispersed one after another. Qin Feiyang and the others also returned to the cave abode, leaving only Ma Guang with a bitter face. He looked at cave abode number 2 for a long time, unable to recover his senses. At first, he wanted to fight for cave abode number 1. But who would have thought that the one living in cave abode number 1 was a guy called Madman? Fine. Then he would settle for the second best and live in cave abode number 2. But now, before he could sit down, it was forcibly occupied by the number 1 on the heaven list, Feng Zihan? Why was he the one who was injured? Cave abode number 1000. Hua-yi leisurely followed Qin Feiyang and walked in. Fire Lotus looked at Hua-yi strangely and said, Brother Hua-yi, we don't seem to have invited you in. Sister Fire Lotus, we are all family. Is there a need to be so distant? Hua-yi looked unhappy. Don't. We haven't reached the point of being so intimate. Fire Lotus quickly waved her hand and said with a pout. If you say that, I will be sad. After all, in order to inquire about Shangguan Fenglan's residence, I spent a lot of effort. Fine, I asked for a rebuff, I'm leaving. Hua-yi shook his head and sighed, turned and walked out of the cave abode in disappointment. Shangguan Fenglan's residence? Qin Feiyang and Madman looked at each other. Fire Lotus hurriedly grabbed Hua-yi and said with a smile, Brother Hua-yi, I was joking, did you take it seriously? Haha. I was also joking. Hua-yi laughed. He didn't treat himself as an outsider at all. He took out a tea table and 3 stools and placed them in the cave abode. Then, he sat on one of the stools in a dignified manner. Next, he raised his head again and looked at Qin Feiyang and Madman who were standing at the side. He chuckled and said, Why are you standing there? Please sit. That attitude, that tone. It felt as if he was the owner of this cave abode, and Qin Feiyang and Madman were guests. Qin Feiyang and Fire Lotus looked at each other, shook their heads speechlessly, and sat on the other 2 stools. Chapter 2005. First you were schemed against by Cheng-Li. Then Madman came to spar with you. Now even Feng Zihan came to find you. Brother Jiang, so many things have happened on the first day of entering Nine Heavens Palace. How are you going to live in the future? Hua-yi looked at Qin Feiyang sympathetically. Qin Feiyang said indifferently, Don't gloat. If they want to deal with me, you won't be able to escape either. Hua-yi shook his head with a bitter smile. I really regret colluding with you. Colluding with you? Brother Hua-yi, do you know how to talk? Fire Lotus looked at him with dissatisfaction. Okay. I was wrong. Hua-yi hurriedly apologized. He looked at Qin Feiyang curiously and asked, What was the result of your battle with Madman? That's not important. Qin Feiyang shook his head and asked suspiciously, Why did you ask about Shangguan Fenglan's residence? Not important. Hua-yi was slightly taken aback and smiled bitterly. It seems that you still don't know. Right now, all the disciples of Nine Heavens Palace are concerned about this problem. After all, your opponent is Madman. Let them be. Qin Feiyang smiled indifferently. Okay. Pretend I didn't ask. I went to ask about Shangguan Fenglan's residence. Of course it was for you. Hua-yi said. For me? Qin Feiyang was taken aback. This was somewhat unexpected. Why did Shangguan Fenglan save you? Obviously, she wanted you to deal with Feng Wenhai. And with your personality, you definitely wouldn't be willing to be a chess piece. So, I thought that you would go and negotiate with her. So, while you were sparring with Madman, I went to ask about her residence. I also learned about Nine Heavens Palace's situation. Hua-yi said. When Qin Feiyang heard these words, he looked calm on the surface, but he was extremely shocked in his heart. This person was too terrifying. Not only had he seen through Shangguan Fenglan's scheme, but he had also figured out what she was thinking. Fire Lotus asked, Shangguan Fenglan, as the Lord of the Disciplinary Hall, should be staying in the Disciplinary Hall, right? If that's what you think, Fire Lotus, then you're too naive. According to my investigation, Shangguan Fenglan has been cultivating in seclusion all these years, and has not asked about the matters of the Law Enforcement Hall. Feng Wenhai and Yin Hui are basically in charge of all the affairs of the Enforcement Hall. In other words, right now, the ones in charge of the family are actually Feng Wenhai and his wife. The people from the Law Enforcement Hall basically follow the lead of these 2 people. In other words, Shangguan Fenglan's position as Palace Master is only in name. If nothing unexpected happens, Feng Wenhai will definitely become the next Law Enforcement Hall Master. That is the reason why Shangguan Fenglan wanted to take care of Feng Wenhai. Hua-yi laughed. Fire Lotus looked at Qin Feiyang and said, Brother, it's just as you guessed. Qin Feiyang smiled and asked Hua-yi, Then where is she staying now? In the depths of 9 Heavens Palace, Lotus Lake. Do you want to go? I can lead the way. Hui smiled. Let's go. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment, then stood up and said to Hui, I really can't wait. Hui shook his head and smiled, then stood up and said, But you're just an outer disciple. If you go find the law enforcement hall master, it will probably cause criticism, and even cause people to guess. It's best to cover it up. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed, and he brought Hui to the Black Tortoise world. Then he controlled the Black Tortoise world and flew out of the cave dwelling, towards the depths of 9 Heavens Palace. Hui looked around in surprise and said, Brother Jiang, isn't this spatial divine item of yours a little too big? Spatial divine item? Qin Feiyang was stunned and asked with a smile, Isn't it good to be a little bigger? It's good to be a little bigger, but this is too outrageous. It looks like a small world. And there are so many living beings. Hui exclaimed. Is that so? Qin Feiyang smiled faintly, but he was secretly paying attention to Hui's expression. This person was getting more and more mysterious. He must not be careless. Not long after Qin Feiyang and Hui left, a black-clothed youth flew through the air like lightning and landed in front of cave dwelling number 1. He bowed and said, Shirtai requests an audience with senior brother Madman. What's the matter? Madman's voice came from the cave dwelling. Senior brother Feng Zijuan, let me ask you something. How was your battle with Jiang Haotian? Shirtai asked. Nonsense. He's just a little rookie. How can he be my opponent? If you dare to ask such a boring question again, I'll cripple you. Scram. Madman's angry voice sounded. Shirtai's gaze trembled as he carefully asked. Then what about senior brother and Jiang Haotian? Madman was silent for a moment before he teased. Feng Zijuan wants to know if I have any relationship with Jiang Haotian? I wouldn't dare. Shirtai hurriedly shook his head. I have nothing to do with him. You can do whatever you want, as long as you don't disturb me. Madman said. Yes. Shirtai replied as a sharp light flashed in his eyes. He then turned around and landed below the sword peak. His expression immediately became overbearing as he said, Jiang Haotian, get out here. Inside the cave dwelling, Hulian was taken aback. Then she frowned. Who was shouting and yelling? And from his tone, it seemed like he didn't come with good intentions. Hurry up. Shirtai shouted impatiently. Fire Lotus raised her eyebrows and walked out of the cave dwelling. She looked at Shirtai and cupped her hands. I wonder why senior brother is looking for my brother? The person I want to see is Jiang Haotian, not you. Shirtai said with a face full of arrogance. I'm sorry, my brother happened to have something to do and went out. Please come earlier next time. With that, Fire Lotus turned and entered the cave dwelling. Since the other party was so rude, there was naturally no need for her to be polite. Stop right there. Shirtai raised his eyebrows and said angrily. Hulian didn't even want to pay attention to him, and closed the stone door directly. But the moment before the stone door closed, Shirtai stepped out and rushed into the cave dwelling with a murderous aura. He immediately slapped Fire Lotus's face. Fire Lotus flipped in the air and fell to the ground. The mask on her face was also shattered. But because she fell down immediately, Shirtai did not see her face clearly. Who do you think you are? How dare you show your face to me? Do you know who I am? Shirtai's slap was not enough. He stepped forward and stepped on the back of Fire Lotus's head. Fire Lotus was about to get up when her face hit the ground with a bang. Her head was bleeding. Then tell me, who are you? Fire Lotus's face was pressed tightly to the ground. It was difficult for her to even speak. Her heart was filled with grievances. Shirtai said, I'm Shirtai, an inner disciple, half-step divine lord. I'll remember it. Fire Lotus gritted her teeth and said, From your tone, it seems like you're not convinced. As expected, like brother, like sister. A bunch of arrogant trash. If it weren't for the rules of Empyrean Palace, I would kill you right now. Shirtai sneered and took out an envelope from his chest. He threw it on the ground and said, Give it to your brother. I'll be waiting for you at the battlefield tomorrow morning. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left with a loud laugh. However, he did not notice that Fire Lotus slowly raised her head. Her blood-stained face was as cold as steel. His eyes were filled with the light of the god of death. After Shi Tai left Sword Peak, Feng Zihan walked out of cave dwelling number 2. He looked at Shi Tai's back, and then lowered his head to look at cave dwelling number 1000. His eyes flashed with an inexplicable light. In the depths of Empyrean Palace, under Hua Yi's guidance, after an hour of hurrying, the Black Tortoise world finally arrived above a lake. The lake was about half a mile wide. The lake water was as clear as a mirror, and white mist lingered on its surface. Colorful lotuses were in full bloom. The lake was surrounded by green mountains and clear waters. Hundreds of flowers bloomed. It was a very elegant and quiet place. On the northern shore of the lake, there was an exquisite attic. It was richly ornamented and had an antique feel to it. At this moment, in front of the pavilion, on the balcony by the lake, a woman in purple stood facing the wind, looking at the quiet lake. A cool breeze blew. Her black hair fluttered and her dress fluttered. From afar, she looked like a woman from a painting, extremely stunning. Hua Yi looked through the painting, entranced. Qin Feiyang raised his arm and waved it in front of Hua Yi's eyes. "What are you doing?" Hua Yi slapped Qin Feiyang's hand away. He glared at Qin Feiyang and continued to stare at the woman in purple. Qin Feiyang's face twitched. He said disdainfully, "You're drooling." "It's none of your business." Hua Yi wiped the corner of his mouth and laughed. "When we were on the sky stairway, why didn't I notice that this woman was so stunning? No matter how stunning she is, it's not for you." Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes. "Why?" Hua Yi frowned. "Don't you know who she is? Is she a woman that an outer court disciple like you can get?" Qin Feiyang was speechless. "You're too vulgar. Love has nothing to do with status or poverty. As long as two people truly love each other, even if there is a difference between heaven and earth, they can still walk together. This is the power of love. Forget it. Even if I tell you, you won't understand." Hua Yi impatiently waved his hand at Qin Feiyang. He stared at the woman in purple with shining eyes. "He's gone mad." Qin Feiyang shook his head. He controlled the Black Tortoise realm and flew over. Then he dragged Hua Yi and appeared beside the woman. The woman in purple sensed the aura of the two and was slightly stunned. She turned her head and said in surprise, "It's you too." Hua Yi cupped his hands and said, "Miss, I am Hua Yi. Hua as in flames, E as in easy. I haven't married yet. I have no other relatives in my family, only a pair of deceased parents." The woman in purple looked at Hua Yi in astonishment. What kind of drama was this? Qin Feiyang was also stunned. He thought that this guy was just joking, but he didn't expect him to really do it. It had to be said that he was really bold. "Miss, may I ask how old you are? Where do you live? Do you have any relatives? Do you have someone in your heart? What do you think of me?" Seeing that Hua Yi was still chattering, Qin Feiyang directly kicked him and said angrily, "Get lost, don't cause trouble. Jiang Haotian, you've gone too far. I'm pursuing happiness." Hua Yi said angrily. The woman in purple's mouth twitched. She looked at Hua Yi strangely. He actually dared to tease her? This little guy was a little something. P.S. Today's 2 chapters. Chapter 2006. Seeing that the purple-robed woman's eyes were a little unfriendly, Qin Feiyang hurriedly said, "Hall Master, this guy suddenly had epilepsy, don't bother with him." "Wait. Who is having epilepsy?" Hua Yi said angrily. "Shut up." Qin Feiyang secretly shouted. Couldn't he tell that she was helping him? Who was this Shangguan Fenglan? The Hall Master of the Law Enforcement Hall. Her strength was unfathomable. The most terrifying thing was that she was scheming, hiding behind the scenes and using their hands to get rid of Feng Wenhai and the others. If she succeeded, the one who benefited the most would naturally be her. And if she failed, she would not lose anything. Even Feng Wenhai would not know that Shangguan Fenglan wanted to deal with him. So for this kind of woman, it was best to stay away from her. She actually took the initiative to provoke her. Wasn't she asking for trouble? Shangguan Fenglan glanced at Hua Yi, looked at Qin Feiyang and said indifferently, "Do you know where this place is?" "Yes. Lotus Lake. The residence of the Hall Master," Qin Feiyang said. Since you know, why did you come? This place is not somewhere you can set foot in. Hurry up and leave. Shangguan Fenglan said. Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows imperceptibly. Did she really intend to be a person who had nothing to do with her? Since that was the case, then he would not be polite. Hall Master, then let's be frank. If you want to use us, you have to pay something. Qin Feiyang said. Shangguan Fenglan was stunned and puzzled. Why don't I understand? Why would I want to use you? Hall Master, this is meaningless. Qin Feiyang laughed. Shangguan Fenglan said. I really don't understand. Qin Feiyang said. Then what is the meaning of the note you gave me? The one you are talking about. I just want you to find out the truth, so that you won't have to bear the infamy of slandering Jiutian Palace for the rest of your life. I am doing this for your own good. Shangguan Fenglan smiled. Thank you very much. However, this disciple really doesn't mind bearing this infamy. As for the Feng clan, I'm just a small fry. I don't want to offend them. Brother Hua, let's go and find Feng Yuan and Feng Wenhai to apologize. Qin Feiyang called out to Hui Yi, then turned around and strode away. Shangguan Fenglan looked at Qin Feiyang's back, and couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. This little guy was more difficult to deal with than he had imagined. Bring a bramble and ask for punishment? Hui Yi was startled. I believe that Feng Yuan and Feng Wenhai are reasonable people. As long as we show enough sincerity, I think we should be able to bury the hatchet. In fact, these two might even become our backing in the future. Qin Feiyang said. These words were naturally said on purpose for Shangguan Fenglan to hear. In other words, if you continue to put on airs, then I will go and help Feng Yuan. Let's see who will be at a disadvantage when the time comes. That makes sense. Hui nodded thoughtfully. He glanced at Shangguan Fenglan and frowned. What about my happiness? Qin Feiyang's veins were bulging. He wanted to slap him. Shouldn't there be a limit to fooling around? Seeing that Qin Feiyang was about to go berserk, Hui quickly waved his hand and said, Okay, we'll go and apologize. Wait. But at this moment, Shangguan Fenglan spoke. Qin Feiyang raised the corner of his mouth, turned around and said, I wonder if Temple Master has any other orders. Don't pretend. Shangguan Fenglan glared at him. I'm innocent. Qin Feiyang looked innocent. Aren't you the one who has been pretending? Shangguan Fenglan looked at the two and asked. Tell me, what do you want? I want you. Hui chuckled without hesitation. Get lost. Qin Feiyang couldn't bear it anymore and kicked Hui's butt. Hui immediately hugged his butt and jumped up, grimacing in pain. What a joke. Qin Feiyang glared fiercely at Hui, then looked at Shangguan Fenglan and said, First, let me enter the Vice Palace Master's study. Secondly, each of us will pay 100 million soul stones, and a legendary level divine art. What? Hui looked at Qin Feiyang dumbfounded. Entering the Vice Palace Master's study, but 100 million soul stones and a legendary level divine art. This was asking for too much. And 100 million soul stones for each person, one for each person. Shangguan Fenglan was also dumbfounded. She really didn't know how this boy dared to ask for so much. Feng Zihan alone can receive 1 million soul stones every month. I think a few 100 million shouldn't be much to you. As for the legendary level divine art, 9 Heavens Palace, as the largest force in the northern region, must have it. Qin Feiyang said lightly. Aren't you afraid of bursting? Shangguan Fenglan said in a deep voice. Bursting? Palace Master, you underestimate the appetite of this disciple and the others. This is not enough to fill the gaps between our teeth. Qin Feiyang laughed. Shangguan Fenglan laughed angrily. Then shouldn't this Palace Master thank you? There's no need to thank me. After all, we're not outsiders. If I can help, I'll help. Qin Feiyang laughed. The corner of Shangguan Fenglan's mouth twitched. The soul stones are no problem, but the legendary level divine art is a little difficult. But in comparison, this Palace Master is more curious. Why do you want to enter the Vice Palace Master's study? In Hui's view, entering the Vice Palace Master's study might be a small matter. But in Shangguan Fenglan's eyes, this was the most important thing to ponder. Qin Feiyang said, purely out of curiosity. Curious? Shangguan Fenglan shook her head disapprovingly and said, "How about this? This palace master can agree to the above conditions, but the legendary level divine art must be replaced with a pinnacle level divine art. But these things can only be given to you after the matter is over. After that," she added. "In addition, everything you do in the future has nothing to do with this palace master." "After the matter is over?" Qin Feiyang frowned. "What if our lives are in danger?" Hui asked. Shangguan Fenglan said lightly, "That's your own business. It has nothing to do with this palace master." This, Hui turned his head to look at Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang pondered for a while and shook his head. "It's hard to predict the future. If you give it to us after the matter is over, I think we'd better not blindly get involved. Let's go to Feng Yuan and apologize." "Okay." Hui nodded. He finally became serious. "Threatening me again?" Shangguan Fenglan raised her eyebrows. Qin Feiyang pretended not to see it and looked at Hui. "When we go to apologize, let's perform well. Maybe we can get more benefits. How should we perform?" Hui was suspicious. Qin Feiyang said, "Tell Feng Yuan that someone wants to harm his family." Boom. As soon as these words came out, Shangguan Fenglan's eyes suddenly turned cold, and a terrifying aura firmly locked onto the two. Hui's pupils shrank, and he quickly became vigilant. Qin Feiyang's expression did not change. He looked at Shangguan Fenglan indifferently and said, "This disciple knows that with the strength and status of the palace master, it's easy to kill the two of us. But since we dared to come, that means we're not afraid." "You're quite confident," Shangguan Fenglan sneered. "Although the strength of this disciple is low, we still have a little confidence. Otherwise, this disciple wouldn't have dared to provoke Feng Wenhai in public at the top of the mountain this morning." Qin Feiyang said. Shangguan Fenglan looked at Qin Feiyang and pondered. A moment later, she withdrew her aura. Hui also breathed a sigh of relief. When he touched his back, it was already dripping with sweat. If this woman flipped out, then this matter would not be settled peacefully. Shangguan Fenglan said, "You're talking about yourself, Hui, Jiang Rishuang, and Jiang Fire Lotus, right?" Qin Feiyang nodded. "That's a total of 400 million soul stones, for peak-grade deity arts. If it were Feng Yuan, he would definitely be able to take it out directly, but this palace master can't get so much in such a short time." Shangguan Fenglan sighed. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "Then Feng Yuan wouldn't dare to embezzle the public funds of Nine Heavens Palace." "He wouldn't dare. If he's found to be embezzling public funds, even Feng Yuan would be punished." Shangguan Fenglan said. Qin Feiyang said, "Then you can't go to the resource hall to ask for these soul stones and deity arts?" "Of course. 400 million soul stones for peak-grade deity arts is not a small amount. If we go to the resource hall, Feng Yuan will definitely ask where these soul stones and deity arts are. And he will have to ask the first elder." Shangguan Fenglan sighed. Although she was the hall master of the enforcement hall, there were many things that she couldn't decide. Qin Feiyang asked curiously, "Then how are you going to get these soul stones and deity arts?" "That's none of your business. But as you said, the future is hard to predict. This palace master can't give you all at once," Shangguan Fenglan said. "Then why don't you come up with an idea that can satisfy both of us?" Qin Feiyang wasn't surprised. How could such a shrewd woman give him all of it at once? 10 million deity crystals in advance. "I'll give you the rest later," Shangguan Fenglan said. "That's too little. At least half." Qin Feiyang shook his head decisively. "Impossible." Shangguan Fenglan shook her head and said, "Don't always think of threatening this palace master. If we really fall out, the one who will suffer in the end will definitely not be me." "Brother Jiang, what you said makes sense. Even if we tell Feng Yuan, will he dare to come and settle the score with Shangguan Fenglan? Won't we suffer in the end?" Taking a step back, even if Feng Yuan doesn't deal with us and lets us follow him and work for him, with our relationship with Feng Zijuan, I don't know what he will do to us. He might even be a cow or a horse, Hui said to himself. Of course I know this. I can't really go and join Feng Yuan. But now what we lack the most is soul stones, So this time, we must do our best to get the largest amount. Qin Feiyang transmitted his voice. Seeing Qin Feiyang silent, Shangguan Fengluan frowned and said, 20 million no more. No. 100 million no less. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Then if you fail or run away halfway, this 100 million soul stones will be wasted. How about 30 million? That's the limit of this palace. Shangguan Fengluan said. Too little. Qin Feiyang frowned. Almost. Shangguan Fengluan said. Neither of them was willing to give in, and the situation was in a deadlock. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.